listening to Paranormal Rain. The air in there felt kind of thick, like it was hard to breathe. Not enough to really panic, but enough that I wanted to get out, fast. Our house had a couple of places like that, and we started calling them hot spots, because they just felt so weird. The Rose bathroom was this little space done up in all kinds of pink tiles, pink sink, even the floor was pink. It looked like someone had tried to turn it into a candy shop, but it just felt kind of stifling instead. I figured it was probably just me not liking the color, or maybe the size, but the feeling never really went away. There was also a hallway in the house that was shaped like a T. My bedroom sat at one end, living room at the other, and right where the hall split, it always felt off. No matter the time, morning or late evening, standing near that corner, it was like someone was staring straight at me from that direction. I don't really know how else to put it, but I started just avoiding that part as much as I could. The basement was another story. One side was done up with a little bar and some stools, but the other half was all rough concrete, laundry, and a workshop. When we first moved in, me, my dad Stuart, and my sister Dora went down there to look around. We found some old yearbooks and random junk. We went up to eat lunch, but when we came back down, the workshop door wouldn't budge. The handle had it had come off somehow, and the door was stuck like someone had locked it from inside. But no one was in there then. We just looked at each other, not sure what just happened. My mom made Dora and me wash our dog, a golden retriever, in the big laundry tub down there. We hated every minute of it. Standing in that faded light, scrubbing shampoo out of the dog's fur, I'd keep glancing to the bar area, convinced someone was watching. I started picturing a tall man, pretty sharply dressed in a button-up and black pants, standing in the corner right next to where the stairs met the bar. Sometimes, I'd get so spooked, I'd forget to dry my hands and just run up to the kitchen, leaving wet footprints behind. The rest of the house always felt a bit off, but those three places, the bathroom, the T hallway, and the basement, were where it was worst. We left that house around 2014, but the dreams didn't leave me. They started while I lived there, but even after we moved, I dreamed about the place for years. Every few months, I'd have another one, ordinary at first, but by early 2020, when I was 21, they'd turned into night terrors. I'd wake up yelling, sometimes not even remembering the dream. The last time it happened, Dora was in it, telling me someone had died in the Rose bathroom. That dream really rattled me. So, I decided to poke around into the house's past. I tracked down info on the original family who built it in the 50s and found the father died there in the 80s. Big heart attack. The house lined up perfectly across from a hospital, driveway pointing right at the front door. It must have happened fast. I managed to find the mother's obituary, and through that, their daughter, let's call her Gloria, on Facebook. I messaged her, careful not to sound weird, just asking if there were strange spots in the house or anything her family noticed. I didn't mention the dreams. Gloria replied, and what she said made my stomach drop. She wrote, "He died in the Rose bathroom, the same as that dream, with Dora telling me that exact detail. She said her dad never let anyone else in the workshop and liked to keep his best whiskey in the bar area, which was right where I always saw that man in my mind. She told me my old bedroom had been her mom's, and there'd been tension between her parents for a long time. Maybe that's why the presence I felt always stopped just outside that room. Gloria was the closest to her dad and had even shared a room with her sister, same one Dora used while we lived there. I checked in with Dora, and she just said the place made her nervous but didn't remember specifics. I finally told Gloria about the image of the tall man I always saw, the shirts, the slacks, standing by the bar. She sent me a photo of her dad from back then, and I stopped for a minute just staring at it. He looked exactly like what I'd been picturing all those years, right down to the pressed collar. After that talk with Gloria, I never dreamed about the house again, not once. That was almost 3 years ago now. Sometimes I wonder if maybe he just wanted to get a message to his daughter and needed someone to listen, so he picked me for that, for some reason. I can't come up with any better explanation. Weird things like this have happened to me before, but this one really sticks with me. Some nights, I think about that woman's eyes, how they never left mine, right up until she vanished behind my car. The parking lot was so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of a nearby soda machine, but it felt like everything around me had just stopped. I've had a few experiences in my life that I still can't explain. Some people might call them strange encounters. Others might say they were coincidences. But deep down, I believe I've come into direct contact with something dark, something evil. When people talk about demons, they usually describe terrifying faces or unnatural creatures. I don't picture them that way. I think they can hide inside ordinary people, people you might pass on the street without giving them a second glance. I also believe children can sense them. Children notice things adults have learned to ignore. They sometimes become uneasy around certain people for no obvious reason, and I don't think we should always dismiss that. Maybe they're seeing something we can't. The first time I experienced something like this was about 13 years ago. I had recently discovered I was pregnant. I wasn't showing yet, and hardly anyone knew. One afternoon, I stopped at a small shopping center on my way home. The parking lot was unusually quiet. I stayed in my car for a few minutes because I had been feeling nauseous. The doors were locked, but I had left the driver's side window open just a couple of inches. The fresh air helped settle my stomach. I was looking down at my phone when I suddenly felt something beside me. It wasn't a sound. It was more like a pressure or the unmistakable feeling that someone was watching me. When I looked up, an elderly woman was walking directly toward my car. She was small and neatly dressed, with pale gray hair. There was nothing obviously threatening about her, but the way she stared at me made my entire body tense. Her eyes never left mine. As she reached the window, I instinctively leaned away from her. She moved close enough to speak through the narrow opening. Then she smiled. It was a calm smile, but there was something deeply wrong about it. She asked, "Do you have any children?" Without even thinking, I answered, "No." She continued staring at me and slowly nodded. "That's good," she said. "That's very good." The moment she said it, I felt a cold wave move through me. I shifted toward the center console and checked that the door was locked. The woman held my gaze for another second before turning and walking behind my car. I immediately rolled up the window. Then I checked every mirror. I looked to my left, to my right, and across the parking lot. Finally, I twisted around in my seat to find her. She was gone. There were no nearby cars she could have entered. There were no buildings close enough for her to have reached so quickly. The parking lot was almost empty, and yet she had vanished in seconds. I drove home without going inside the store. At the time, I couldn't fully understand why the encounter had frightened me so badly. It wasn't until later that I remembered her question. "Do you have any children?" I had told her no, but technically that wasn't true. I was already carrying my child. Sometimes I wonder whether she knew. I wonder whether that was the reason she approached me in the first place. And I wonder whether some instinct inside me understood the danger before my mind did. Maybe that's why I said no. Even now, all these years later, I can still see her face. I can still hear the strange satisfaction in her voice when she said, "That's good." I don't know exactly what stood beside my car that afternoon, but I have never believed it was simply an old woman. That's how it was with this farmhouse. We lived in this old place in rural Vermont for a while. It had been built sometime in the late 1800s, and you could feel its age the moment you stepped inside. The floors creaked, the walls seemed to hold every sound, and the whole place had this strange sense of memory about it. The family who had owned it the longest lived there from around the 1930s until the early 1970s. They had a son who never came home from the war. Later, another owner died inside the house and wasn't found for nearly a week. People in town said he'd become a recluse and had filled up a couple rooms with stacks of magazines and boxes. There was one doorway between the study and my parents' bedroom that always felt especially wrong. The air around it seemed heavier, almost thick. I had to pass by the study whenever I went upstairs to my room, and I absolutely hated doing it at night. That room never felt empty. During the day, it felt as though someone was sitting quietly inside, listening. At night, it was worse. Walking past the doorway gave me this overwhelming fear that a hand might reach out, grab me, and pull me into the darkness. And I wasn't a child at the time. I was in my 20s. I knew the difference between an overactive imagination and the sense that something was genuinely off. Small objects moved around the house all the time. We had this little ceramic dog that came inside a box of tea. We kept it on the kitchen windowsill, but it would turn up on the table, beside the sink, or on top of the microwave. Kitchen drawers would slide open on their own, too. You'd hear the wooden runners scraping from another room, walk in to investigate, and find a drawer pulled nearly all the way out. We also saw movement in the corners of our vision, a figure crossing a hallway, a shadow passing a doorway. You'd turn your head and nothing there. But twice, I saw something directly in front of me. The first time, my sister Della was standing in the dining room while I was in the kitchen. We were cleaning and talking about what still needed to be done. Behind her was a narrow cupboard that had once been a doorway leading down to the cellar. As I looked at her, I saw part of a man walk behind her. I couldn't see his face or his legs. What I saw was a gray, old-fashioned coat moving steadily across the room. I could make out the collar, the shoulder seams, even the folds in the fabric. It passed behind my sister and disappeared straight through the old cellar doorway. Della stopped talking. She looked at my face and said, very quietly, "What is standing behind me?" The second time happened in my bedroom. My room was upstairs, and I kept my bed pushed close to the windows. I always liked falling asleep with the cool air coming in and looking out over the fields. That night, I was thinking about a long road trip Della and I were leaving for the next morning. I suddenly had the unmistakable feeling that someone was watching me. I turned slightly, and there was a young woman standing beside my bed. She had a pale, oval face, and her hair was parted in the middle and pulled neatly back, the way women wore it in those old photographs from the mid-1800s. She wasn't glowing or see-through. She was just there, looking down at me. Strangely, I wasn't scared. I had the feeling she'd come to see me before I left, almost like she was saying goodbye. I blinked, and she was gone. I just rolled back over and continued looking out the window. My father saw things in that house, too. On 2 separate occasions, he was sitting in his chair in the study when he saw a young woman come down the stairs, cross the hall, and enter the dining room. Both times he thought it was me, but I was upstairs and hadn't moved. We were the only 2 people home. Outside the house, there was another figure I saw again and again. In the mornings, while I was heading out to feed the animals, I would notice a man crossing the field. He wore a white shirt with dark suspenders. I never saw him while looking directly at him. He was always just off to the side, at the edge of my vision. Whenever I turned to get a proper look, the field was empty. One afternoon, I was alone in the kitchen when I heard the front door open and close at the opposite end of the house. Then I heard my father talking to the dogs. I walked through the house, expecting to find him taking off his coat or standing in the hallway. Nobody was there. Every door was locked. That same front door caused strange experiences all the time. Even when we were elsewhere in the house, we would feel it open and shut. The pressure in the room would shift, followed by the deep sensation of the door closing. Sometimes there wasn't even a sound. You would just feel the impact travel through the house. We moved often when I was growing up because of my father's job, and that wasn't the first old house I'd lived in. In New England, buildings come with long histories, and sometimes it seems as though the people who lived in them never completely left. What wears you down is the constant feeling of being observed, the sense that someone is standing behind you or leaning over your shoulder, even though you can't see anyone. I haven't lived in a house like that for many years now, and honestly, I don't think I'd ever choose to again. One morning, I told her I'd dreamed about an old man sitting with me on the couch. He had his arm wrapped around me, almost like he was keeping me safe. I remember saying I'd never seen him before, but I wasn't afraid, not even a bit. He just felt kind. I pointed at it and said, "That's him. That's the man who sat with me in my dream." One of my relatives explained later that great-grandpa Henry was always the one watching the younger kids, always taking care of them. He liked staying close, just quietly making sure everyone was all right. Years after that, when I turned 13, I ended up living with my grandmother on my mom's side for a while. My grandpa had died pretty suddenly, and the house felt totally different. For months, my grandma and I stayed somewhere else. When we finally came back, we mostly used the upstairs bedrooms and kept the kitchen and living room open. Grandpa Arthur's bedroom stayed shut. During our first week back, that's when the strange thing happened. I could hear the liquid pouring into a mug, and the smell of coffee started drifting through the house. Then I heard the basement door open and slow footsteps going down the stairs. Lying there, I kept hearing the footsteps come back up from the basement. The door closed, and someone started up the stairs toward the second floor. Then the footsteps came down the hall toward my room. The doorknob didn't turn. The door stayed shut. Whoever it was just stood there, and I lay as still as I could, holding my breath under the covers. I heard footsteps go down the stairs, cross the kitchen, and pause next to the coffee maker. Then the machine made a little click as it shut off. The basement door opened and closed again, and the footsteps faded away. The next morning, I asked my grandma if she'd gotten up during the night. That night, back in my dad's house for the first time in years, it was as if the air itself was holding something different. My mother had died there, but I hadn't expected anything unusual, just the heaviness of memory. I've always been pretty open-minded about things I couldn't explain. Even as a kid, I had some weird experiences, but there was always some sort of excuse for them. Maybe I hadn't slept, or maybe it was the pipes, or just the house making noises. I usually brushed it off and moved on. All of that changed when I found out my mom had cancer. When her health got worse, I started thinking about things I hadn't in years. Like, is there something after death? Are spirits real? I wanted answers. No, actually, I wanted proof. Not just the idea, but something real. When she passed, it pretty much crushed me. I learned to live with it, but losing her stuck with me, always just there, no matter what was going on. For a long time, I avoided my dad's house, since it was the same place where she'd died. It felt too heavy. But a few years later, during a rough patch, I needed a place to crash for a couple nights. My old room had turned into a storage closet by then, so I set up on the living room couch. My dad's 3 little black dogs, chubby things, maybe terrier mixes, were there. I'd known them for years, so I knew their routines. At night, they got quiet as soon as they settled into their kennel. I was lying on the couch, just about to fall asleep, when one of the dogs, Zoe, let out a low growl. At first, I just ignored it. Then a few seconds later, she growled again. I whispered, "Shh." The kitchen light was still on, giving this dull, yellow glow over the armchair and into the living room. Zoe looked right at me, but I figured she was just annoyed with Vivian or Judith, the other 2. About a minute later, Zoe growled a 3rd time. Something about it felt odd. When I looked over, she wasn't glaring at the other dogs at all. She was staring right into the kitchen, not moving, totally alert. I told her again to be quiet, but she didn't even flick an ear. She just stayed locked on whatever she thought she saw. So I looked where she was looking. Floating over the kitchen table, right under the ceiling fan, there was this thick patch of white mist. Not exactly gray, not see-through. It just hovered there. The fan was still. There wasn't any steam from food, nothing burning, nothing that would explain it. I got up on one elbow, trying to really see it, thinking my eyes might be playing tricks in the light, but it didn't move like smoke. It just hung there, like a tiny cloud. For a second or two, I really thought maybe I was losing it, that my brain was making stuff up because the grief was finally getting to me. Then, and I can't say why, but I just felt this wave of calm, not scared, just a weird sort of peace. And before I could even talk myself out of it, I thought, that's Mom. It didn't say anything, obviously. It didn't do much except exist for maybe 30 seconds or so, maybe less, maybe a bit more. It's hard to pin down now. Then it kind of faded out until the air was clear again and Zoe settled down in her kennel. But the feeling stuck around after the mist left. I'd come back to that house at one of the lowest points I can remember, after avoiding it for so long. Looking back, that moment felt like her way of telling me she still had my back, not in words, just in being there. Whatever it was, I believe it was my mother finding a way to reach me right when I needed her most. Several years back, I worked at a living history museum. I won't say which one, because the official position was that the property was definitely not haunted. Unofficially, almost every employee had heard the stories. Management probably wanted to avoid scaring off visitors or losing staff. One coworker actually quit after hearing too many of the stories. The building connected to my story was a one-room schoolhouse. According to legend, it was haunted by a young boy the staff called Little Benny Blue. People described him as wearing a blue sailor-style outfit, the kind a child might have worn in the early 1900s. Inside the schoolhouse were 3 rows of wooden desks, an old wood-burning stove near the entrance, and a chalkboard at the front. There was also a raised platform with the teacher's podium, a bench, a wooden chair, and an old American flag with the historically correct number of stars. Nearly everything in the room was made of wood. The desks were held together with old-fashioned square nails. That summer, I was assigned to cover breaks for several historic houses and the schoolhouse. One afternoon, I went inside to relieve the employee working there so she could take her lunch. At the time, the schoolhouse was being used as a craft station. The exact craft changed from week to week, but that day, the tables were covered with orange construction paper, glue sticks, and those dull safety scissors. Once my coworker had left, I checked to make sure there were no visitors, supervisors, or other employees nearby. Then, feeling a bit ridiculous, I started talking to Little Benny Blue. I told him that if he was actually there, he could knock over a glue stick. He could move some paper or mess with one of the craft supplies. Nothing dramatic, just something small. For a while, nothing happened. I was standing near the front of the room, looking toward the teacher's platform. Then I turned toward the entrance to see whether my coworker was coming back. Nobody was there. When I turned around again, an old square nail was lying on the floor near the platform. That stopped me. The floor was wooden. The desks were wooden. The podium was wooden. Anything metal falling in that room should have made a sharp, unmistakable clatter. I hadn't heard a thing. I picked up the nail and checked the teacher's desk, since it was the only nearby object it could have come from. I searched for a loose joint, an empty nail hole, or any sign that something had fallen apart. There was nothing. The desk was totally solid. I placed the nail on top of the desk and waited for my coworker to return. When she came back, I showed her where I'd found it, without mentioning I'd been talking to the ghost. She looked genuinely confused. She hadn't seen the nail there before leaving for lunch. We agreed we'd mention it to a supervisor, but neither of us had any good explanation. That wasn't the last weird nail incident in the schoolhouse. A few months later, during December, the building had been turned into a holiday craft area. Kids made cards and ornaments, and there were forms for writing letters to Santa. At the beginning and end of every shift, I checked inside the desks, since visitors loved leaving things behind or hiding supplies in odd places. One evening, I was checking the room with another employee. I'd worked there the night before, so I knew the desks had been cleared. My coworker was teasing me for being so thorough until I reached one desk. There was an old nail holding the seat to the desk behind it. Normally, that nail was buried so tightly in the wood, you'd need a tool to pull it out. I knew because during a quiet shift, I'd tried to wiggle it once and it didn't budge. That evening, the nail was sticking halfway out. My coworker stopped laughing. I reached down and pulled it free with my fingers. It hadn't been loose the night before. I took the nail up to the front desk and showed the first supervisor I saw. Maintenance replaced it before my next shift. There were some other odd incidents involving smaller nails and screws showing up inside the old stove. I'd check it at the start of a shift and find it empty. Then, a few hours later, there'd sometimes be a few pieces of hardware inside. Even that nail sticking out of the desk might have been loosened by a maintenance worker who forgot to return and finish the job. But that first nail is different. I was alone. The floor was clear. Nobody entered the building. Nothing made a sound. I asked a little boy in blue to move something. Then I turned around and there was an old nail lying where it hadn't been just moments before. I'm still a skeptic, but I kept that nail. I saw my brother and sister standing together at the far end of the hallway, just outside my aunt's open hotel room door. That probably doesn't sound strange, but the thing is, I'd left both of them behind in our own room only seconds before. I was about 11 when my family took a weekend trip to Vancouver Island. It was my mom, my dad, my older brother, my sister, and me. My aunt joined us, along with a close friend and her friend's husband. Let's call him Gareth. Gareth was competing in a local strength contest, so that was really why we all went, turning it into a little family trip. We ended up staying in this really old hotel in a quiet little town, not far from the ferry, if I remember right. The place looked like it belonged to another century. The lady at the front desk, I think she had big glasses, said the building was over 100 years old. It was small, only 3 floors and less than a dozen rooms on each. Our whole group got placed on the 3rd floor, and as far as we could tell, we had it to ourselves. My aunt, Gareth, and their friend had a small room near one end of the hallway. My family got a bigger room with 3 beds at the opposite end. The hallway bent in an L shape, so you had to walk around the corner to see from one set of rooms to the other. That afternoon, everyone was relaxing in our room. There were potato chips on one of the beds, and someone had left the TV on, but the volume was barely up. After we'd been out most of the day, everyone was just talking and joking around. At some point, my aunt asked me to go fetch something for her from her room. I can't remember exactly what, maybe her sunglasses or a book. Since nobody else was staying on the floor, they'd left their door open. I stepped into the hallway and started toward their room. When I rounded the bend, I could see straight through their open doorway. Standing right at the doorway were my brother and sister. They were side by side, almost shoulder to shoulder, both facing away from me. I could just see the sides of their faces, enough to know they really were my brother and sister. They even had on the same clothes I'd just seen them wearing. My brother's shirt was red. Wait, no, it was green that day. Anyway, it was the same as a minute ago. But here's the thing. I'd left both of them behind me in our family's room. They couldn't possibly have beaten me down the hall, and there was only the one hallway. I would have seen them if they'd gone ahead of me. I tried to act normal. I called out, "What are you two doing?" Neither one said anything. They just walked right through my aunt's open doorway and vanished around the corner inside the room. I followed right away, maybe 3 or 4 seconds behind. But when I got inside, the room was totally empty. It was a tiny room, 2 beds, a narrow closet, and a bathroom so small you couldn't stand in it with the door shut without bumping your elbows. There wasn't anywhere for 2 people to hide. I looked under both beds, opened the closet, checked behind the bathroom door, even pulled back the shower curtain, just in case. Nothing. Just me, alone in the room. It's hard to explain how bad the fear hit me, but it wasn't like a jump scare or anything. It felt more like the entire room was wrong suddenly, like every sound was gone and the stuff in the room didn't belong to anyone. I bolted back down the hallway. When I burst into our family's room, my brother and sister were both still there on the bed, laughing about something with everyone. They hadn't moved. Everyone was acting totally normal, like nothing had happened at all. I didn't tell anybody. I was freaked out, but also embarrassed. I kind of decided, right then, that I'd just imagined the whole thing or had some weird mind trick happen. I was 11, so I figured maybe it was one of those things. Years passed. I only ever told my parents and maybe 2 other people, but I'd always tack on that I probably just imagined it. It was easier that way. Then, almost 17 years later, something happened that threw me for a loop. My family had a house party. There were people everywhere, relatives, friends, even a neighbor or 2. At one point, I walked over to where my brother was talking with some folks about weird experiences. I got there just as he started telling them about something that happened when he was about 13. He said it happened on a family trip to Vancouver Island in an old hotel. That stopped me right in my tracks. He explained he'd been downstairs in the lobby and went back up to our floor to grab something from the room. When he stepped onto the 3rd floor and walked into the hallway, he saw me standing by our room. Not someone who looked a bit like me. He saw me, exactly as I was at that age, in the same clothes I'd worn on that trip. He called my name, but whoever it was didn't answer. Instead, it just walked straight through the closed door of our hotel room. I'd never told my brother what I saw in that hotel, and until then, he'd never told me his story. I interrupted him, had to, and told everyone about what I saw, how he and our sister were standing at my aunt's door, how they vanished when I followed. For once, both of us just kind of stared at each other, realizing we hadn't made it up, or at least not on our own. I don't know what was in that hotel, don't know if it was haunted, if something was copying us, or if there's some answer that hasn't crossed our minds. All I know is what I saw, and when I heard my brother's story 17 years later, I finally believed myself. At night, though, something always felt off, like the warmth faded from the rooms, even though nothing looked different in the dark. I grew up as the oldest of 5 kids. Our place was on the edge of a quiet town. Nothing spooky about it at all. It wasn't abandoned or crumbling, and there weren't any alleys nearby, just a cluttered, noisy home. At night, I turned into someone else entirely. I used to sleepwalk down the hall, mumble to people who weren't there, and sometimes wake up screaming so loud that the neighbors knocked on the walls. On other nights, I'd cry in my sleep until everyone was awake. Since I was the oldest, everyone thought I'd be the one keeping things together, but actually, I was the reason my parents looked worn out all the time. They tried all sorts of things: doctors, sleep specialists, counselors. Some thought I was anxious. Others thought maybe something bad had happened to me that I couldn't remember. They gave me sleeping pills, calming stuff, antidepressants, melatonin, in just about every form you can think of. Nothing stopped the dream. It always began in the same place. I was a younger version of myself, sitting in a backyard I didn't recognize. The grass was pale and a little too long, and a line of trees stood past the fence, almost perfectly still. I'd be playing with a doll. At first, it looked normal, except its face always reminded me of someone in my family. Sometimes my mother, sometimes one of my little brothers. Once, it even looked like me. Then I'd notice the doll's wrists and ankles were wrapped in thick iron chains. The weight would get so heavy. My arms hurt as if those chains were pulling right through me, and I dropped the doll in the grass. Then the rain would start, one cold drop on my forehead, and then I'd see her. She was impossibly tall, her neck stretched way too long, arms nearly dragging on the ground, a dark mole under her bottom lip. Her eyes, she had no eyelids. She'd lean down, her face next to mine, and whisper a warning in my ear. The warning changed every time. Someone you love will leave. Don't trust the person at the door. Grief has already found your house. As soon as she spoke, my throat would get tight, like hands were squeezing it. I'd see myself shaking in the puddles, my face getting darker as pain spread through my chest and legs. Everything burned inside me. Then I'd wake up. I'd find myself in bed, stuck, not able to move. She'd be right there next to me, one long finger against her lips, and she'd lower her face closer to mine. Her breath was freezing, and it smelled like spoiled meat and damp dirt. "Don't tell them who I am," she'd whisper. When I could finally move again, my throat hurt so much, and my legs ached so badly I could barely walk. One morning, after my mother found me crying by my bed, she took me to a new therapist. She spent half the drive talking about how much it cost and begging me to just tell the truth this time. The second I sat in the therapist's office, I fell apart. I told him everything: the backyard, the doll with chains, the warnings, the lidless woman, her arms, the mole, the way her fingers squeezed my throat. He listened quietly, then told my parents to buy stronger melatonin gummies and try a calmer bedtime routine. That was it. When we got home, I took off my shoes and immediately noticed a horrible smell in the hallway. It was thick, sour, totally rotten. The closer I got to my bedroom, the worse it got. I just knew something was waiting for me. My hands shook as I opened the door. A dead fox was lying on the carpet by my bed. Its fur was damp and tangled. Flies swarmed its eyes, and tiny white larvae moved under its belly. I had no clue how it got in or how long it had been there. Then I saw something next to its front paw, a fingernail, long, cracked, coated in dark dirt. It looked exactly like the nails from my dream pressing into my throat. After that day, things began disappearing from my room. First, a brass key my grandmother had given me. Then my stuffed rabbit I'd had since I was small. Later, some old photos vanished from a drawer that no one else touched. None of it ever turned up, but something was always left behind: a piece of coarse black hair, a broken bit of yellowed nail. One time, a wet handprint under my pillow. I got her message. I'd talked about her, and now she wanted me to know she could reach me, even now that I was awake. A few years later, we moved to another town. That very first night in the new house, I slept quietly. She never came back, and after a while, it faded so much I nearly convinced myself it wasn't real. But some years later, I found an old notebook from those childhood therapy visits. Most pages were just family stick figures and sketches of our apartment. But near the back, there was a drawing of a tall woman standing by a child. Her arms went all the way down to her ankles. Her eyes had no lids. Underneath, in my messy handwriting, I'd written, "She knows where we are." As soon as I read that, it all came back. My throat, her cold breath, and the awful smell right before she showed up. Up until then, all the little things in my apartment just seemed odd or annoying, not exactly supernatural. But watching something move like that, right in front of me, I'm still replaying it in my mind. I love horror movies. I love Halloween. I love the idea of ghosts, haunted houses, and all those unsettling little stories people tell around a fire. But when it comes to what I actually believe, I'm usually pretty skeptical. Still, some strange things have been happening in my apartment lately, and I'm beginning to wonder whether they're all random accidents or pieces of something bigger. I've lived here for almost a year now. Before this, I stayed in the same apartment for about 6 years, and even there, I sometimes wondered whether something odd was going on. A framed album cover crashed off the wall and broke more than once. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and find an object right in the middle of the floor, even though I didn't remember leaving it there. I've also had moments where I thought I could feel my late best friend nearby. That feeling has faded over the years, but it still happens sometimes. Part of me even believes I may have lived before, although I have absolutely no proof of that. I even own a spirit board, but I've never had the pointer move without someone touching it. Nothing dramatic ever happened. No mysterious messages, no candles blowing out, no old-fashioned kid standing in the corner or anything. Then I moved into this apartment. Almost immediately, it felt different. The building complex has this slightly eerie vibe. It's surrounded by marshland, old trees, and thick curtains of Spanish moss. At night, the whole area looks like someone decorated it with the note, "Make it pretty, but also kind of creepy." Inside my apartment, I sometimes hear noises that I can't identify. There's always been a weird energy here, but for a long time, it was never serious enough to bring up. Over the last few months, though, the strange moments have started piling up. At first, I thought something was turning on my TV. I'd be in the other room and suddenly hear music or voices. Eventually, I figured out it was a technical glitch. If I let the TV go to sleep instead of actually turning it off, the sound from whatever I'd been watching would sometimes play again, even though the screen stayed dark. Creepy, but probably not paranormal. But there are other things I just can't explain. One afternoon, I came home and found every bottle from the shelf in my shower lying at the bottom of the tub. Shampoo, conditioner, body wash, all of it. A friend suggested maybe maintenance was working upstairs and the wall shook. That's possible, I guess, only the shelf is wedged in a way that makes it tough for all the bottles to fall at once. Then there were the plants. I have 4 tiny fake plants sitting on my kitchen windowsill. The blinds hang behind them, so people walking outside just see the plants, not me. One day, I came home, and all 4 plants were scattered across the kitchen counter. They hadn't just tipped over. It looked like they'd been pushed forward through the blinds and tossed right onto the counter. I still have no idea how that happened. Another night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard music coming from somewhere else in the apartment. I paused my show and followed the sound to my bedroom. My smart speaker was playing Dreams by Fleetwood Mac. I said out loud, "Why are you playing that?" It answered, "Because you asked me to." I replied, "No, I definitely did not." It apologized and stopped the song. That could be another tech glitch, except I'd been humming that same song for days. It was stuck in my head, and I kept singing it while cooking, cleaning, just moving around. Maybe the speaker picked up my singing and misunderstood. Still, the timing felt oddly specific. Then there was the knock. One afternoon, someone knocked hard on my front door. Not just a tap, loud enough to make my dog lose it. I quickly put her in her crate and went to answer. Only a few seconds had gone by, but when I opened the door, there was nobody. No package, no note, no footsteps. I looked both ways down the walkway, but didn't see anyone. Maybe a kid playing a joke. Maybe someone knocked on the wrong apartment and rushed off. Or maybe my invisible roommate wanted my attention. Things got even weirder when animals started showing up inside. A couple weeks ago, I came in from the porch and found a snake stretched across the floor near the fireplace. I panicked, grabbed my dog, and bolted outside. By the time help arrived, the snake had vanished. We checked everywhere, but never found it. I'd left the porch door open, so I'm hoping it just went back out. Still, now I check corners like I'm on patrol. Then, not long after, I came inside and saw a small marsh crab sitting in the middle of the living room. To be fair, I do live by a marsh. Maybe there's a rip in the porch screen or a gap somewhere that let them in. But why am I suddenly getting visits from animals that seem like they're from a haunted house prop box? Instead, I get a snake and a crab, one after the other. I love animals, but I think we can respect each other's turf. The moment that really got to me happened right after I'd come back from a week-long trip. I was about to shower and grabbed a towel from the rack. The second I touched it, I realized it was wet. Not just a bit damp, soaked, as if someone had just used it after a shower. But I'd been away for a full week. Nobody else was supposed to be in my apartment. A few nights later, I heard a loud crash from the kitchen. I sometimes hear neighbors through the wall or ceiling, but this sounded like it came from my own kitchen. I checked every cabinet, every countertop. Nothing had moved. Then, today, something happened right in front of me. I have a little framed picture sitting on a bookcase. It's of a woman in a yellow jacket next to a fox. It sits in the middle of the shelf with a basket of old phone chargers on one side and a carved wooden bird on the other. Nothing was touching it. While I was standing there, the picture suddenly shot forward and landed on the rug. It didn't slide or wobble first. It just flew off, like something had shoved it. I stared at it, trying to process what I'd seen. After a moment, I picked it up, put it back on the shelf, and spoke out loud. I said, "If someone is here, I don't know what you're trying to tell me. I'm paying attention, but I'm not getting the message. I don't mind sharing the space as long as you're not trying to hurt me, my dog, or mess up my stuff. But please quit throwing things." And that's where things stand. I honestly don't know if I'm just hitting a streak of normal, weird accidents, or if this old building just rattles and glitches, or if it's something else. Maybe every incident has a simple explanation. Maybe the bottles slipped. Maybe the plants got tangled in the blinds. Maybe the speaker misheard me. Maybe somebody knocked and ran. Maybe the animals snuck in through a hole in the porch screen. But when I look at all of it together, it makes me wonder if something's trying to get my attention. If that's true, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do about it. I'm not actually scared, but I am curious. And honestly, I'm a little tired of dealing with flying decorations and weird animal guests. Whatever is here, ghost, glitch, or just a string of bad luck, I just hope it knows one thing. It can keep the peace, or it can start helping pay the rent. On that night, the heavy footsteps seemed to echo through the whole house, each one slower and louder than the last. I've experienced strange things for as long as I can remember. Paranormal stories were almost normal in my family, even though nobody really liked talking about them for too long. On my dad's side, my grandmother was known as a spiritual healer. People would come to her for prayers, cleansings, and help with things they couldn't explain. My dad had his own frightening encounters growing up, including seeing shadowy figures moving through rooms when nobody else was awake. My mom's side of the family is deeply religious. My mom has always had vivid, disturbing dreams that sometimes keep her awake for hours. When I was little, I went through something similar. I would wake up terrified, sometimes because of a dream, and sometimes because I thought I heard someone whispering near my bed. I ended up so afraid of sleeping alone that I started staying in my older sister's room. Before that, she'd never experienced anything odd, but whenever I slept in her room, she sometimes woke up hearing a voice in the darkness. It only happened when I was there, and it made me wonder if whatever followed me into that room was somehow connected to me. The stories in our family go back even further, to the first house we lived in. I was too young to remember much, so most of what I know comes from my parents and siblings. My dad saw dark figures passing through the hallway. My older brother once saw a young girl standing inside the house and assumed she was one of his sisters until he realized none of us were around. My mom and sister both heard a woman scream from somewhere inside the house, even though they were alone. And when my sister was little, she felt something moving behind her pillow. When she turned around, she saw what looked like a hand slowly pressing against the fabric. Years later, we moved into another home, and that was where I started having experiences myself. Most of them were small things: shadows, strange sounds, the feeling of being watched. Because I'd grown up hearing these stories, I didn't react the way most people probably would, but there was one night that changed that. My sister and I were teenagers, maybe 16 or 17. It was sometime in late 2019, and we were sitting in the living room watching a crime show. I remember the scene. One of the investigators was questioning a woman and asking her to repeat a series of actions. Our little terrier started barking from the dining room. We ignored him because, honestly, he barked at everything. A car outside, a noise from the neighbors, sometimes at thin air. Then our bigger dog started barking. That got our attention right away. He was a protective dog, but he was calm unless he believed something was genuinely wrong. My sister and I looked at each other, and before either of us could say anything, we heard him running from the dining room into the kitchen. The kitchen was partly hidden from where we sat. A narrow passage connected it to the living room. We could see the entrance, but not the whole room. That's when we saw our big dog backing out of the kitchen. He wasn't turning around. He walked backward, staring hard at something we couldn't see. Then he yelped and jumped sideways. I'd only heard him make that sound once before, when someone accidentally stepped on his paw. It sounded like he'd been struck. My fear turned to anger almost instantly. My sister and I sprang from the couch. She grabbed the big dog by his collar, and I picked up the little one. Neither of us wanted to look directly into the kitchen. Our big dog kept pulling toward it, growling and barking like someone was standing there. My sister had to grip his collar with both hands to hold him back. The TV was still playing. The dogs were barking, and we were talking over each other, trying to decide what to do. Then my sister said, "Wait, be quiet." I paused the TV. The room went still. Our dog lowered his head and started growling again. And then we heard footsteps. They were slow, heavy, like someone wearing thick boots. One step, then another, then another. The strangest part was the floor. Earlier that day, something had spilled in the kitchen, so parts of the tile were a bit sticky. Whenever we walked across it, our shoes made a faint pulling sound. These footsteps made that same sound. It didn't sound distant or muffled. It sounded like a real person walking across our kitchen floor. My sister leaned toward me and whispered, "What if someone broke in?" We almost hoped that was true. An intruder would be terrifying, but at least an intruder would make sense. Still, every door was locked. The dogs had been right there in the dining room. Nobody could have come in without us hearing. The footsteps stopped. something changed in the room. I can't really explain it. Suddenly, it felt like someone was standing just beyond the wall. The air, the mood, felt heavier. I got this overpowering sense that it wasn't human. For some reason, I pictured an older man. I couldn't see him, but that feeling was strong. Something masculine, cold, and angry. My sister grabbed a Bible off the table and started reading out loud. She tried to pray the way our mother did, using that strong voice, but both of us were shaking. As she prayed, I started to feel exhausted, not just tired, the kind of tired where you can barely stand, like the strength was being pulled out of me. When her voice got weak, I took over and read for a while. I tried to sound brave, but my words came out quiet. My chest felt tight, and I was fighting off panic. The presence didn't leave. Then, the footsteps started again. At the same time, dishes in the sink started clinking together. We heard movement upstairs, and then another heavy step in the kitchen. The footsteps got louder, closer. I looked at my sister and whispered, "It's coming toward us." Step by step, it crossed the kitchen. Then it stopped just behind the wall, blocking our view. It was only a few feet away. That was the moment that stuck with me. It felt amused, not happy exactly, more like it enjoyed our fear. I could sense it knew how scared we were, and it wanted us to understand that no prayer was going to frighten it off. Before I even realized it, my sister and I were both on our knees. My whole body felt weak. My sister told me to call our parents while she kept praying. My mom answered right away, and I tried to explain what was happening without breaking down. My sister turned on worship music and cranked the volume. I stayed on the phone while my parents prayed with us. Then, as suddenly as it came, the heaviness was gone. The dogs stopped tugging for the kitchen. The house felt empty again. When our parents got home, my sister and I bolted outside without looking back. My dad went straight into the kitchen, hitting the walls with his palm and ordering anything there to get out. My mom followed behind, praying through every room. Nothing else happened that night, but the fear hung around. About a week later, our dad came home from work and walked upstairs in his work boots. The sound was almost exactly the same. My sister and I both froze. For a second, we couldn't breathe. It was like being right back in that living room, listening to those footsteps coming closer. But there's one more part that still gets to me. 2 nights before everything happened, I had a dream. In the dream, my sister and I were kneeling side by side in a dark place, thick with fog. We were holding hands, praying. A large shadow walked toward us. I couldn't see its face or shoulders, just its legs and the heavy boots it wore. I remember closing my eyes, then peeking just a little to see if it was still coming. It kept getting closer until it stopped right in front of us. Then I woke up. At the time, I brushed it off, but after the kitchen incident, I couldn't get over how much the dream matched what happened. The boots, the footsteps, my sister and I kneeling and praying. I still don't know why any of it happened. I don't know what that presence was, why it seemed to focus on us, or why I was so sure it was like an older man. I don't know why it mocked us, or why I dreamed about those boots before that night. I've had other odd experiences since then, but nothing as real or threatening as those footsteps. We live in a different house now. It's peaceful, mostly. There was one weird thing outside, but, well, that's for another day. Whatever moved through our kitchen that night was real enough for us. And all these years later, I can still hear those slow, sticky footsteps moving closer in the dark. Back in 2016, I was 13 and living in a small Pennsylvania town where the houses stack up on hills and the trees seem to keep secrets. My place was at the top of a steep hill, and across the street lived my neighbor, Annie. She was a year younger, around 12. We weren't close friends, but we shared a quiet sort of understanding. That year, Annie lost her grandmother. I didn't really know how to support someone through grief back then. My own family kept to itself. No one talked about stuff like that, but I could see how much it hurt her. After she got back from her family's place, I found Annie with red-rimmed eyes, dragging herself around. I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her. It felt right. That night, we hung out at her place since her brother was out. He'd let us use his bed, a big queen-size one, so we set up there. We did the usual, talked about weird teachers, swapped stories, and giggled over dumb inside jokes. At some point, around midnight maybe, we watched South Park on Annie's old laptop. She started nodding off during the last episode, her breathing slowing. I finished the show, set the laptop on the floor, actually, and tried to sleep too. That's when things got weird. Time gets blurry in my head, but I remember how Annie kept tossing around, not in a normal way, but almost like she was wrestling with someone in a dream. She made these noises, soft at first, sort of like a kid trying to talk without words. Then they got louder, not just sleep talking, more guttural, almost like she was arguing or afraid. At some point, I glanced at the clock. It was just after 1:30. Annie's head was suddenly at my feet, like she'd spun herself around in her sleep. The noises got sharper. Then she fell still for a little while. I couldn't sleep, just watched her, waiting. When it hit about 2:30, or maybe a bit past, Annie shot upright, so fast that I almost yelled. Her eyes looked straight past me, focused somewhere behind. Her whole body just relaxed, arms loose, head slightly tilted. Then she whispered, "But I didn't mean to." The way she said it, you'd think someone was scolding her, or maybe she was scared. She swung her legs over the side and then just lay back down, arms stiff, like some kind of puppet. I tried to convince myself it was sleepwalking, but I turned to where she'd been staring and saw a figure, a woman's shape, glowing white all over, but with no features. Not in the path of the window, and the streetlights outside were always this orange color, not white. The figure lasted maybe a second. I remember blinking hard, but it was gone. I panicked. Quietly as I could, I grabbed my backpack and left Annie's house. It was 2:37 a.m. I checked my phone because I needed something real to hold on to. Walking home, the sidewalks felt much longer than usual. Even though the street was empty, I kept hearing heavy footsteps behind me, like really heavy, as if someone big was following me, the kind of sound rubber soles make on cracked concrete. I stopped to listen, thinking it was just my own steps echoing off the houses. But when I sped up, the footsteps matched me. Only when I reached my own front porch did they stop, fading into nothing. The next morning, I told Annie what happened. She just shrugged, didn't say much. Weeks later, I brought it up again, and Annie looked at me, kind of tired but calm, and said, "Oh, that was my grandma. She visits me when I sleep now." She said it like it was normal. I never really got over that night. Maybe it was Annie's grandma, maybe it was something else. Our little neighborhood sits on top of abandoned coal mines from forever ago, and people talked about accidents or strange things that happened underground. Sometimes I think whatever was watching us, watching me, wasn't there to harm anyone, just keeping an eye out. I'm older now, and Annie and I don't talk. But when it gets late and the house creaks, sometimes I can still see that flash of white and hear Annie's voice in my head, but I didn't mean to. It still makes me pause, even if I'm not sure what it meant. It was subtle at first, but strong enough that I could both see and feel the mattress moving underneath me. I checked for every ordinary explanation I could come up with. Not a single appliance, pipe, or machine running nearby. Nothing under the floor, nothing in the walls above the room. Just quiet. At first, I thought maybe it was my muscles twitching. I pulled back the covers, checked over myself, but it wasn't me shaking at all. I sat up, and the bed kept vibrating right under me. Instinctively, I don't even know why, I said out loud, "Are you seriously shaking my bed right now?" The vibration cut out, just stopped, mid-sentence. That became the new routine. Most nights, I'd end up saying, Please stop shaking the bed. Good night. Usually, it would stop after a few seconds, or sometimes it would take a minute or two. It didn't last, though. Lately, nothing works, not even being polite. My patience for the whole thing is just about gone. I've dealt with unusual things before, but most episodes faded on their own, or faded after someone I trusted helped me. This time, I tried getting some help again, but the activity just kept building. Sometimes it feels like something's attached itself to me, almost interfering with my body. This sudden electrical sensation that starts around my head and spreads right through me. The only way I can describe it is being briefly charged from the inside. Like a human sparkler, I guess. It doesn't exactly hurt, but I'd do anything to never feel it again. I get flickers of movement out of the corner of my eye, even with nothing there. No shadows, no branches, nothing reflective. It's wearing me down. I'm exhausted most days, grouchier than I want to admit, and it's affecting my mood. I'd call myself a pretty ordinary, grounded person. I work, pay bills, hang out with my family, and usually just relax at home. Even my friends say I'm practical, not the type chasing after weirdness. The only thing that changed before this started up again was when I began renovating an old, abandoned farmhouse, well over 100 years old, and I'd never set foot there before. My own house is old too, and I've heard from neighbors that someone passed away here years ago, but I'd lived here nearly 2 years before any of this started. Nothing strange until right after I started that renovation. It's possible the timing is just coincidence, but nothing else unusual happened around then. Sometimes I wonder if I might be more sensitive to things, emotionally, maybe spiritually, but I don't go looking for this. I've had a stable life, loving family, no major trauma that would explain this. I've found a couple things that interrupt the activity for a while, but nothing sticks. If someone saw me during one of these moments, they'd probably think I'd lost it, but living through it feels completely different than just watching. I wouldn't wish this on anyone, not even someone I disliked. I just want someone trustworthy who's calm and respectful, who understands or can at least help make sense of all this. Practical, spiritual, medical, whatever makes sense. I'm just looking for answers, honestly. When I was 16, something stared at me from the crack of our basement bathroom door. Something I'd never seen before. That memory stuck with me for years, but I didn't know then that my dad had seen it too. My father was a pastor, so our family lived in a parsonage owned by the church. Even after years there, the place never really felt like it was ours. Right after we moved in, odd things started happening. Doors slammed shut or swung open with no one around. Lights would flicker, and sometimes, I swear, I saw the switches move by themselves. Random items fell from shelf edges, like a pink plastic mug that never broke, even though it hit the tile floor more than once. Beds would shake in the night. There were low growling sounds coming from rooms we knew were empty, and every once in a while, someone would say they spotted a shadowy figure that vanished as soon as you noticed it. Most of it seemed focused on my older brother Carson's room at first. Then my dad went from room to room, praying over the house. And after that, the activity just picked up. It was almost like, it really did feel like whatever was there got stirred up and decided to make itself known everywhere. The scariest thing, for me, happened late one night in the basement. I was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, watching something on TV. The small bathroom was straight across from me, with the door just barely open, showing a thin slice of shadow inside. I glanced down at my phone, not really paying attention to the movie. Suddenly, this intense feeling hit me, like I was being watched, and not just by anyone. I looked up. Behind the bathroom door stood this thing. It was tall and way too thin, with skin that looked grayish-brown and stretched tight over its bones. No muscle at all, like a skeleton covered in old leather. One hand clutched the edge of the door, even though I remember thinking earlier I'd shut it all the way, or maybe I hadn't. Its eyes were huge, sickly yellow, glowing out of that dark space. Its mouth was drawn into a wide, horrible grin, almost like it was laughing at how scared I was. I couldn't move. We stared at each other for what felt like ages, even though it probably lasted just a few seconds. Then I blinked, and it was just gone. I jumped up, ran over, and slammed the bathroom door shut. I tried telling myself I'd imagined it, or maybe the TV light made some weird shadow. I only told Carson, not anyone else. 4 years later, in our new house, things were peaceful. Nothing ever moved on its own. No footsteps, no weird growls. It was a quiet place, and we were all happier there. One evening, I was sitting with Carson and my dad in the living room, working on a face out of polymer clay, just messing around, sculpting. The more I shaped the face, the more I realized it looked familiar, but I couldn't place it at first. Then it clicked. I looked up and held it out, saying, "This looks exactly like the thing I saw behind the bathroom door." Carson leaned in, his nose wrinkling. "That is awful," he said, then called over to our dad. "Dad, look at this." Dad's face changed the second he saw it. He actually raised his voice, which he never did. "Throw that away, right now." Both Carson and I just stared at him. Dad always liked when we made things, even if he didn't get what it was. He'd usually just say, "That's creative," or ask how long it took. He never shouted. We both asked why he was so upset. He glanced at the clay face and then, really quietly, said, "I saw that point in the old house." He told us that back when we lived in the parsonage, he'd woken up one night and saw what looked like our mom heading to the bathroom by their bedroom. He didn't think much of it until he realized she was wearing a long bathrobe. She never wore robes. That's the detail that made him reach across the bed, and he felt our mom still lying there, asleep. The figure near the bathroom just stopped. Then it slowly turned around. As he watched, the face changed. It wasn't Mom anymore. It was that same thin, skeletal thing I'd seen. The dry skin, the huge yellow eyes, the awful smile. It moved closer, right up to him, inches from his face. Dad squeezed his eyes shut and started praying. When he looked again, the room was empty. He never told us before that he'd seen it too. For years, he'd always had an explanation. Trains making things shake, even though the tracks were miles away. Bad wiring, crooked floors, or just our imaginations. But after that night, he stopped making excuses. Whatever was in that house, it made sure both of us saw it. I turned onto the broad trail that leads up to the road, thinking I'd be home in 10 minutes or so. I always check behind me when I walk alone, just a habit more than anything. When I glanced back, there was a figure way down at the other end, coming my way. Far enough that I couldn't make out features, but I figured it was a man. I remember thinking I wasn't the only stubborn one out in this wet weather. I kept walking, listening to the squish of my sneakers, and after half a minute or maybe a bit more, I can't remember exactly, I glanced back again. He was much closer than he should have been. Not just a few steps, like way closer. That made me uneasy right away because I didn't hear running or anything, and his pace looked relaxed, almost like he was just taking a stroll. That's when I really started to pay attention to how strange he looked. He was taller than anyone I'd ever seen. It's odd, but when you walk the same path for years, you sort of know how people look next to the trees or the benches. This guy was just off. Too thin, too stretched out, and those arms hung down so low, almost to his knees. He was wearing a dark suit, or what looked like one, and his head, this narrow oval, sat on top in a way that didn't look right. At first, I blamed the rain or the distance for hiding his face, but as he got closer, I realized there just wasn't a face at all. No eyes, no mouth, nothing you could latch onto. Just this pale, blank shape. I picked up the pace. I told myself not to panic, tried to be logical about it. Maybe it was just someone with odd proportions, or the drizzle was doing something weird to my sight. Maybe it was a hood or a mask. But when I checked again, he was closer still, and his walk was slow, steady, not rushed. Somehow, though, he was gaining on me. His arms barely swung, his steps were even, but the space between us kept shrinking. That's when I really got scared. I stopped trying to make sense of it and started running. My chest felt tight and my legs were burning, but I didn't care how I looked. I just wanted to make it to the main road where there'd be people, cars, some normal noise. I broke out of the trees and onto the sidewalk by the road, cars rushing past, a bus with its brakes squealing, even the sound of someone's radio as they waited at the light. It all felt like a relief. I kept walking, but turned to look back at the trail opening. I waited for him to appear, half expecting to see that tall figure step out onto the pavement. He never did. The trees just stood there, leaves dripping, nothing moving. Maybe he ducked into the brush, or maybe I just lost sight of him. I don't really know. I told this story to Rose later. She said it was probably someone in costume messing around, but the weather was awful and there wasn't anyone else out there. It would have been a whole lot of trouble for no audience. When I got home, I sat at my old laptop and typed in what I remembered. Impossibly tall man, black suit, pale face, no features. The results all pointed to Slender Man. I stared at those pictures until my hands started shaking a little. They were almost exactly what I'd seen. Then I read that he wasn't real, just something made up online. That didn't make it any easier to process. I didn't know the stories. I'd never even heard the name. But what I saw matched, right down to those long arms and the blank face. People have told me about thought forms, how if enough folks believe in something, it takes on a kind of presence. I'm not sure I buy that, but it's about the only theory that sort of fits. I also read Slender Man usually appears to children, not to adults. I was in my 50s then, but I'm just under 5 feet tall, so maybe from a distance, I looked younger. That's as much of a joke as I can make of it. Truth is, I was feeling pretty down that day, worn out in a way I can't quite explain. Maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe it, whatever it was, noticed. I still walk near those woods, but if the sky looks heavy, I wait for a better day. And every single time I pass the start of that broad trail, I make sure to look, just to check there's no one strange, no tall, blank-faced figure waiting at the other end. That night in July, something shifted as we sat on the mausoleum steps, and it only got stranger when the Ouija board started to rotate on its own. Okay, so this happened one summer when I was living in southern New Jersey. A few friends and I had gotten really wrapped up in ghost hunting. We spent weeks going to all the places people whispered about, abandoned foundations in the Pine Barrens, weird roadside landmarks, forgotten graveyards, and a couple of local legends near the old ironworks. Most nights, nothing ever really happened. Then came the night with the Ouija board. The plan was to meet one of my roommate's friends at a little cemetery outside town. This guy called himself Dark Crow. I'll just call him Crow. We were warned before we got there. Don't ask for his real name. Don't crack jokes about whatever he wanted to do. Apparently, he took the whole paranormal thing very seriously. And honestly, once you saw him, you got it. Crow had long black hair in a low ponytail, a thin braided beard, and a long coat that looked way too extra for a hot summer night. He barely talked when we arrived. He just kind of watched us like he was sizing up who'd be trouble. There were 6 of us, mostly early 20s. Normally, telling us not to mess around would have had the opposite effect, but something about Crow made us all keep quiet. He told us the cemetery was especially active. Before we did anything, he split us into pairs and sent us walking around the graves for about 20 minutes. He said it'd help us tune into the place. I've had a few weird things happen that I can't explain, so I wasn't totally skeptical. I always figured the more you pay attention to this stuff, the more it starts to feel real. That night, most of us believed at least a little. A couple of people were clearly there just to prove nothing happened. When we finished walking around, we met up by the steps of this old stone mausoleum. That's when Crow opened his car trunk and pulled out a Ouija board. He held it under the headlights for a minute, since apparently it needed to charge. This thing glowed in the dark. I remember looking at this plastic, store-bought board and thinking, really? This is supposed to open a door to the other side? We sat in a circle on the mausoleum steps. The 6 of us crowded around the board, and Crow sat behind it, leaning back against the heavy metal doors. I ended up facing him with my back toward the rest of the cemetery. We put our fingers on the planchette and started with the standard questions. Is anyone here? Can you give us a sign? The planchette slid a bit at first, but everyone kept side-eyeing each other. No one wanted to admit it, but we were all watching each other more than the board. Then we asked for a name. The planchette suddenly jerked under our fingers. It didn't just slide, it pulled. It spelled out a name none of us recognized. I can't remember the exact spelling now, but it sounded old. Maybe Spanish, maybe Latin. I really hope it wasn't Latin. We asked how it died. The board spelled W-A-T-E-R. Someone asked if there were other spirits in the cemetery. It answered Y-E-S. My roommate, it was Timothy, I think, asked if something bad was going to happen. The planchette moved again. Y-E-S. Right after that, the air turned freezing cold. At first, I thought I was just imagining it. Then I breathed out and saw mist right in front of my face. Everybody saw it at the same time. This was late July. It had been warm and muggy all night, but now it felt like winter settled around the mausoleum. That's when Crow made this low sound, like he'd seen something he was expecting. I glanced up. He wasn't watching the board. He was staring right behind me. Before I could turn around, the actual board began to rotate. Not the planchette, the whole damn board. Nobody was touching it. We'd already pulled our hands away when it got cold. The board started turning on the stone step, scraping softly as it moved. Then it spun faster. It did a full turn, then another, then a third. After the third spin, it stopped. No one said anything. I checked underneath for string, wire, anything that could have made it move. Nothing. The board wasn't rigged, and nobody was close enough to mess with it. Then I felt something press down on me. It started at my shoulders and spread across my chest and back. It was like a massive weighted blanket just got dropped on me, except, well, it wasn't comforting. It felt like something holding me in place. Crow looked right at me. Calm as anything, he said, "You need to leave." I didn't argue. I grabbed 2 of my friends, Mitchell and Elsie, and we left right away. I had no intention of sticking around to find out what happened next. Later that night, my roommate, Timothy, came home and told me what happened once we were gone. They asked the board if it favored anyone in the group. It spelled out my initials. Then they asked if I was connected to the bad thing it had predicted. The board answered Y-E-S. After that, It spelled out M-O-V-E over and over. So they moved from the mausoleum steps to the hood of the car. M-O-V-E. They tried a bench near the cemetery entrance. M-O-V-E again. Finally, they carried the board to an old stone fountain near the center of the cemetery. That's where it stopped. The planchette moved to goodbye. My roommate told me later that Crow had figured something would react to me. He said he asked me to leave because he worried whatever showed up might attach itself to me. People can believe whatever they want about Ouija boards or haunted cemeteries. All I know is what I felt. I'll never forget that cold, the board spinning on its own, or that crushing weight over my shoulders. After what happened, I still don't know what to believe. For one of the clues, I came up with what I thought was a clever trick. I ordered a cheap spirit board online and got some strong little magnets. I stuck the magnets under a few of the letters, and I put another one inside the planchette, so when people used it, the pointer would slide to whatever message I wanted them to find. It worked exactly how I hoped. People had fun, tried to outsmart each other, and everyone got a laugh trying to summon fake spirits. After the party, a couple people crashed on the couch, but by the next afternoon, everyone was gone. I picked up the props, shoved the board in the back of a closet, and honestly forgot about it. That night, after I'd fallen asleep, I suddenly woke up. I was lying flat on my back, eyes open, staring up at the ceiling fan. For a second, I just felt kind of groggy, like I hadn't slept at all. My arms and legs felt heavy, like I'd sunk way down into the mattress. I went to roll over and realized I couldn't move. Every part of me was stuck. My arms wouldn't budge. My legs were just there. I couldn't even turn my head on the pillow. I'd never had sleep paralysis before, but I'd read about it. So right away, I started telling myself it was just that. This is sleep paralysis, I thought. You're awake, your body isn't. You're safe. I knew some people saw weird stuff or heard things, like voices or figures in the room. I figured if I could keep calm, it would pass. It didn't help much. In my head, I half joked, just don't hallucinate anything standing in the corner. And that's when the footsteps started. They were right by the bed, loud enough that I knew, or I thought I knew, what direction they were coming from, the side near the nightstand. It sounded like something with actual feet, not just creaking floorboards. The steps would walk right up to me, almost next to my face, then shuffle away, back and forth, near, then farther, near again, closer. I tried to talk myself down. I knew about how the brain fills in gaps during sleep paralysis, but when you're stuck there, unable to even blink, that logic didn't do much. The steps padded right up to my pillow and stopped. Then I heard this sharp, sucking in kind of breath. A split second later, I felt a blast of air, like someone leaned down and blew right into my ear, hard, like actually blew, not just a draft or my own breath. The sound was so crisp, so weirdly normal, that suddenly I could move again. I jerked sideways so fast I almost rolled off the bed and ended up clinging to my partner, Nolan. He woke up, totally confused, and asked what happened. I just mumbled that it was nothing and that we could talk in the morning. After a while, we both went back to sleep. The next night, Nolan had sleep paralysis for the first time ever. His experience was different from mine. He said he felt something in the room, like a shape he couldn't see, but the timing freaked me out. We'd both gone our whole lives without this, and then, one day, after using that board, it hit us both. I kept telling myself it was just a coincidence, that we'd hyped ourselves up with ghost stories, and that my little trick with the magnets had gotten in my head. The board was just cheap cardboard and plastic. It was a party gag. I keep coming back to the sound of those footsteps, though. It stuck with me, that breath in my ear, too, almost too real. I still can't decide if it was just my brain playing tricks, or if messing around with that board let something join in that I never meant to invite. heard what they'd found in Mason's room, with all those red words covering the walls, I finally understood just how serious things had gotten. Years ago, a close friend confided in me that he was gay. He looked nervous and asked, "Are you still going to be my friend?" I told him, "Of course, that doesn't change anything. You're still you." Not too long after that, I met his boyfriend, a guy named Jonah. People called him the doll doctor because he could fix and restore just about any kind of doll. He was so good at it that a famous country singer once arranged for him to fly out to Oklahoma, repair part of her private collection, and come back a few days later. Dolls really were Jonah's whole life. He collected them, bought and sold them, and always seemed to know the history behind almost every style. Then, one day, a family in Austria reached out to him. They shipped him an old Victorian doll for restoration. They told him the doll once belonged to a young girl named Genevieve. Back in those days, families who couldn't afford the best doll hair sometimes used hair cut from the child who owned it. So this doll had Genevieve's real hair sewn into it. Genevieve carried that doll everywhere. Then a sickness hit the area and she passed away. Nobody could explain why later on, but her grave ended up disturbed. The doll was taken from her coffin, passed through different owners, and eventually sent all the way to Jonah. Jonah had another roommate, Leonard. Leonard was Native American and, well, pretty in tune with spirits. From the minute the box with the doll showed up, Leonard wanted nothing to do with it. He said, "That thing is watching me." At night, he'd hear noises, not footsteps, but more like a slow scraping from joints or limbs shifting. He'd say it reminded him of fingernails across a chalkboard. Then, things started getting really weird. Little footprints, smaller than a child's, showed up in the dust on top of their TV, their stereo, and some other electronics. Then, the bathroom mirror started showing writing. First, it was just, "Leonard is mine." At first, everyone thought it was a dumb prank. Then, the same message showed up across the glass shower doors. Jonah also had one of those old battery-operated writing dolls, the kind that sits at a desk and scribbles sentences on paper. One day, they found sheet after sheet, dozens of them, covered in the same words. "Leonard is mine. Leonard is mine. Leonard is mine." The thermostat would crank itself up until it felt like a sauna in there. Then one night, they came home and found magazines torn up all over the floor. When they opened Leonard's bedroom door, every wall was covered in red writing. Even the ceiling, "Leonard is mine," over and over. They suspected the writing doll at first, so they brought it to my place for a while. But the weird stuff kept happening back at their house. That's when I told them, it isn't the writing doll. It's got to be the Victorian doll from Austria. So around 4 in the morning, they showed up at my door with it. The instant the doll left their house, everything stopped. The messages, the noises, the changing thermostat, all of it. The only odd thing that happened at my place was that both my car keys and my mom's car keys vanished. We searched for days, but they never turned up, not even when we cleaned under the fridge. I never once felt like the doll was evil. I guess you could say, pretty sensitive to energy, the kind around people and objects, and what I felt wasn't demonic at all. It felt more like an attachment, like a lonely presence that never wanted to leave what it loved. I just think Genevieve never let go of her doll. All this happened before the COVID lockdowns. While I was away on vacation, a relative got it in her head the doll was dangerous. She contacted a famous paranormal television investigator who said he wanted to buy it, but his offer was way lower than I expected. I told him, "I don't want money for it. Just donate $700 to a tiny pinball museum in Vegas, and you can have the doll." I got back from about a 3-week trip to Florida in mid-March of 2020. California was shutting down, businesses closing, everything upside down. Never heard from the investigator again. I've worked at a nightclub in Modesto for more than 30 years, and sometimes in October, I put the doll on display there. Some employees won't go near it, while others think it's just interesting. One night, a manager and I decided to ask the doll some questions. Another employee had brought in an old doll from her own family, one that was rumored to be haunted too. What I didn't realize was that the manager had started streaming us live online. We began talking to Genevieve's doll, asking questions. For a while, nothing. Then, all of a sudden, we heard it, a little girl giggling. It wasn't loud, but it was so clear, like it was coming from right there beside us. There weren't any kids in the building. The laugh started out sweet, then it just changed, became something sharper and cold. Honestly, we nearly jumped out of our shoes. The weirdest part? The nightclub's owner happened to be watching the live stream at that exact moment. He called his son right after and demanded, "What are they doing inside my club?" That wasn't the only weird thing that ever happened there. Over the years, I've heard unexplained footsteps, seen objects move around table height, and sometimes felt like someone was standing right behind me when there was nobody there. One former bartender, her name was Jacqueline, once took 4 selfies inside the 3rd stall of the women's restroom. The first 3 looked normal. In the 4th, a man's face showed up behind her, almost like it was pushing out from the tiled wall. You could make out the eyes, the nose, and a mustache. We sent that photo to a paranormal researcher, and he told us it was some of the clearest evidence of an apparition he'd ever looked at. I still have that picture. And the doll's still with me, too. That odd feeling stuck with me the whole night. The Royal Aviation Museum isn't what people usually picture when they talk about haunted places. Modern building, bright lobby, the kind of spot that hosts field trips and birthday parties. But I ended up on this ghost tour there with my friend Ava, mostly out of curiosity and, well, because it seemed funny that Manitoba has a ghost reputation now. The tour started pretty normal, except they dimmed the main lights and left only some faint hallway bulbs on for safety. You could still see the old plane wings and glass cases, without too theatrical. That's how I knew I wasn't just imagining the shadows. I saw 2, maybe 3 kids, small, quick, racing around that upper balcony above us. They'd cut behind the railings and peek out, just visible for a second. I figured it had to be stragglers from another group. Our guide reminded us this was strictly adults only, and she seemed certain nobody else was in the building. The security guard, Bruce, volunteered to check upstairs, but he didn't find anyone. He came back down, shook his head, and quietly said, "It's empty up there." The group moved on, but every so often, out the corner of my eye, I kept catching movement. When we got to the section with wreckage from a crashed plane, some twisted metal, an old seatbelt buckle still attached, I agreed to do the Estes method experiment. That's where you put on headphones and listen to a spirit box, answering questions you can't actually hear. The headphones were kind of terrible, lots of static, voices under the noise, and I had to focus hard to pick out any words. As I sat there, though, I started feeling unbelievably cold. It was weird. I mean, I'd been complaining about the museum being too warm before, and my jacket was still zipped all the way up. But suddenly, my body felt like it had been plunged into ice. Only my head stayed normal, like the cold stopped right at my throat. I kept rubbing my arms, but it was useless. When they said the session was over, Ava reached over and touched my hand. She's always the one with freezing fingers, but this time she jerked away and said, "You're ice cold." That freaked me out more than anything. A minute or 2 later, just as suddenly, the cold dropped away and I was sweating. The tour kept moving, so I tried to shake it off. Ava took her turn with the headphones, and I slouched off to the side. I started grumbling under my breath, half making jokes at the spirits, I guess just to feel normal again. We rolled a couple of yellow balls, the kind that blink when moved, across the floor and waited to see if anything would interact. Even then, I could still notice those shadowy kids up on the balcony, but I was too tired to keep worrying. That's when I felt a tight tug, like a hand gripping my ponytail and yanking it down, hard enough that it made me yelp. I spun around, but there was no one behind me. Everyone else in the group was clustered up by the next display case, a few good steps away. They just stared at me. I was done after that. I didn't want to do another experiment, didn't want to stand in the dark or try to communicate with whatever was there. I just wanted to leave before something else happened. It was almost irritating because no one else had seen the figures or felt cold or got grabbed. Some of them thought I was just goofing off or trying to add some drama to the tour. I wasn't doing any of that. That was just my night at the museum. I'm happy to go back in the daytime, but I won't be signing up for another ghost hunt in there. Once was enough. I lived in that house from about 12 until I moved out at 16, and even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. There was a long hallway with a mirror at each end, both of them facing each other exactly. If you looked into one, the reflections would repeat over and over, so many times that it was like you could almost see behind yourself. Walking down that hallway, I was always sure someone was right behind me. It wasn't just a vague sensation either. It felt like a person, step for step, following me. I got so scared that I started staring at the carpet whenever I walked through. I couldn't handle looking into either mirror anymore. I was positive that one day I'd catch someone standing behind me, even though I knew nobody else was there. Then there were the footsteps in the ceiling, almost every night, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning. Sometimes it was closer to 1:15. You'd hear this steady walking above us. The steps sounded slow and heavy, not like scratching or animals. I mean, they sounded like a grown adult was pacing up there. I know it wasn't just in my head. Friends who stayed over heard the footsteps too. One night, I was up way later than usual in my room playing video games. Everyone else had gone to bed and the hallway light was on. From my spot, I could see straight down the hallway and into part of the kitchen. I glanced up and there it was, the shape of a person standing in the kitchen. It was completely black, no detail at all, no face, no clothes, just this cutout, human-shaped shadow facing me. The second I noticed it, the shape turned and walked toward the fridge. Then it just vanished right into it. Right after that, our dogs, 2 mutts, one with a red collar, started absolutely losing it, barking, growling, claws skittering on the tile like someone had come into the room. I shut my bedroom door as hard as I could, shoved a couple of blankets under the gap, and got under the covers. I barely breathed till morning. Another night, I'd been reading in bed with the lamp on my nightstand. The room was dim, but I could see everything clearly enough, except for one upper corner. The top of the wall, near the ceiling vent, was pitch black, not just shadowy, like it looked as if something had painted that spot darker than it should have been. The lamp's light reached all the nearby walls, but that one patch just swallowed everything. My mom owned this old porcelain doll, too, that she kept in the dining room. The thing's eyes would track you as you moved, I swear. I've seen regular paintings that do that, but this doll was different. Sometimes I'd turn it to face the wall before I left, but whenever I came back, it would always be facing out again. My mom knew how much I hated that doll, but for some reason, it never scared her. The attic was the worst part of the house, honestly. There was a staircase to a finished room over the garage, and right at the top, a little square hatch opened into the attic. You had to walk under it to get through. That spot felt, well, the air got heavier the closer you got. I always hurried past it. One afternoon, I was home alone by the stairs when I heard someone whisper my name from behind the hatch. I didn't open it. I didn't answer. I just walked away. That house also gave me some awful night terrors. I'd dream about strange old ceremonies and fires in the sky, and people in robes doing rituals under burning clouds. And then there were these other dreams, harder to explain. Sometimes I'd see enormous objects getting stabbed by tiny, needle-like pieces. No story, no context, just that weird image, and it scared me so much I'd wake up shaking, still kind of rattled by it. Or maybe I have that backward. The night terrors started after moving in? I'm not sure anymore. I used to sleepwalk too. My stepdad, Alan, said I'd sometimes walk into their bedroom at night and just stand next to the bed, quietly staring at them. I never remembered any of it. Plenty of times, I heard somebody call my name when I was the only one home. The voice always sounded so close, I expected to see someone the next room over. The strangest thing is, my mom claims the house made her feel protected. That never made sense to me. To me, that place was where most of the worst years of my growing up happened. There was real pain in those walls, and some of it's still hard to talk about. All I know is I have never felt more watched, more unwelcome, or more certain that my life was in real danger than I did living in that house. That's what happened the night we watched something dark move in the hallway, a shape that shouldn't have been there at all. It all started when I got a call from a woman, let's call her Mrs. Landon, who thought her cat was possessed. I wasn't about to jump to any wild conclusions right away. To be honest, I was skeptical. Still, her story was odd enough to take a closer look. She told me her cat would suddenly start screaming, loud, angry, sometimes terrified, and it didn't stop there. The way it walked was off, like it was moving in slow motion, head cocked at weird angles that didn't look right. If she got near it during these times, the cat would swipe at her, which was strange since it was usually a mellow animal. After the episodes, instead of calming down, it would run and hide, tense, tail lashing, and sort of growling to itself for up to an hour. The whole thing just sounded so bizarre. I shared this with my teammate Yvonne, who's got a real sensitivity for the paranormal. Once she heard the story, she was pretty insistent. She said we needed to check it out. So, we went over to Mrs. Landon's place around 4:30 in the afternoon. She gave us a tour of her house, a cozy little ranch-style place, 3 bedrooms, one of them painted a soft green, 2 bathrooms. There was nothing about it that felt off or haunted. Then she brought out the star of the night, her cat. He was sweet as pie and seemed to instantly like Yvonne, rubbing his face on her hands like she'd been there all his life. Yvonne spent a while alone with the cat while I went over the usual paperwork with Mrs. Landon. She mentioned she had a date that evening and had to work a late shift at the hospital, so she invited us to stay and do our thing while she was gone. She took off around 7:30 p.m., and that's when we started investigating for real. We went from room to room, asking questions quietly and hoping for a response. Maybe an EVP, maybe some kind of knock. The place was still, just the hum from our EMF meters and the old pipes knocking every now and then. Nothing happened for hours. Then, at exactly 11:30 p.m., the cat's scream cut through the silence from the main bedroom. I moved to step inside, but Yvonne stopped me with a light touch on my shoulder and a finger to her lips. The cat's screams were sharp and desperate, not like anything you'd hear from a normal cat fight. My skin went all prickly as I listened hard. That's when I saw it. In the far corner, a shadow started to thicken. I don't know how to explain it right. It looked darker than the dark around it, almost like it was moving even though nothing else was. There was a whisper, so faint and hollow it didn't even show up on our recorders, and we couldn't make out the words. The cat was in full-on defense mode, fur up, eyes wild, growling. It was just like Mrs. Landon had described. Yvonne kept her voice calm and gentle and spoke right to the shadow. "You're scaring the cat. I don't think that's what you want. If you leave this room and go into the bedroom across the hall, We can help you." We quietly moved into the smaller bedroom and sat down on the bed, waiting. The air was thick with that kind of silence you only get in old houses at night. After a few minutes, Yvonne gripped my arm and pointed toward the doorway leading to the shared bathroom. Right there, plain as day, I saw a figure, humanoid, pitch black, no face or features, just an absence that made my eyes ache. We'd worked together like this before, so I just followed our routine. I spoke soft and steady. "It's okay. The cat's calm now. We want to help you." The shadow crept forward, just a bit into the room. Suddenly, through my little DVR and in my earpiece, I picked up a whisper. "Kitty." I asked if it wanted to pet the cat. The shadow reached out a sort of arm, at least that's what it looked like, and pointed back toward the main bedroom. I asked if it wanted to hurt the cat, but there was just a soft, shaky sigh. I repeated the question, saying we needed an honest answer if we were going to help. Yvonne said she got the sense it was a young male spirit, probably a teenager who'd faced some challenges when he was alive. The shadow sort of swayed back and forth, listening. I told him, "You scared the cat. If you want to be friends, sit still and talk to him. If the cat knows you mean no harm, he might come over by himself." A second later, the cat poked his head into the doorway, calm now. No one moved, not even the shadow. After a few quiet moments, the cat jumped up on the bed beside us. I talked softly to the cat, and Yvonne scratched behind his ears. When I looked up, the shadow had faded away. Nothing else happened that night. We locked up and left quietly. 2 days later, Yvonne called, all excited. She'd found out a young man with Down syndrome had died on that property years ago. He'd fallen from a little treehouse in the backyard. We gathered our evidence and met Mrs. Landon the next day. I played her the recordings of us talking to the spirit so she'd understand what happened. When she heard me telling the spirit how to make friends with the cat, she started crying. She said that morning she'd found her cat lying in the smaller bedroom, purring and moving his head like someone was petting him, like the spirit had finally found a friend in that little cat. After he left, and it was just me and the kids, the feeling changed. It didn't just get stronger. It felt like whatever it was wanted me to know it was there. Some nights, I wouldn't even move. I'd lie there, clutching my phone, shining the light around the room. Of course, there was nothing. Just the wall, the old brown chair, shadows on the curtains. My dad died back in 2019. Maybe a year after that, I'd sometimes catch a whiff of the scent from his old place when I was downstairs at night. It always stopped me cold, not like scared, just surprised. The smell was, hard to describe, sort of like his aftershave and old wood. I mostly noticed it if I went for water or had to use the bathroom. For whatever reason, that started soon after we moved here. I've always had these worries, just this anxiety about things I can't see. It goes back to when I was a kid, actually, but it had faded for years and only really flared up again with all the stress after my husband left. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if I'm just like my dad's side of the family. There's a whole history there with, well, mental illness. I tried to convince myself it was just in my head. Then my youngest, he's 6, started getting terrified of monsters in the house. I figured, okay, maybe it's the divorce, or maybe those creepy videos he found. He was sneaking them on our tablet, not the TV like I first thought. I got rid of the app, banned videos altogether, but it didn't solve much. He still hates being alone at night, so now he sleeps on a mattress next to my bed. I sit with him, promise him he's safe, and that usually does the trick. About a week ago, I realized that the feeling in my room was gone, like completely gone. I thought, great, maybe I'm finally moving on. Even felt a bit silly for letting it get to me for so long. Last night, my oldest, Gabrielle, came to talk to me. She said she's been feeling watched in her own room now, just at night. I could tell she was working up to something, and then she told me, a few nights before, she'd been at her desk painting her nails when she suddenly felt a warm breath on her neck. She spun around, nobody there. What got me, though, was the way she described it: enormous, dark, threatening, like something was looming right over her. That's exactly how it always felt to me. I can't stop thinking about how all of this lines up. The same week the feeling left my room, it showed up in hers, almost like it just moved down the hall. We have 2 cats. They don't act weird, no staring into corners, nothing like that. They'll sleep anywhere upstairs. That's given me some peace, I guess. But no one's ever died in this house. The only thing that sticks with me is that smell I used to get downstairs, the one that reminded me of my dad. But my dad was kind. It doesn't add up. Why would he ever want to scare us, or his grandkids? I just keep telling myself to stay calm, especially for the kids. But honestly, I'm pretty shaken up. I don't know if it's just leftover stress, or if something is really here with us that I can't explain. Back when she was 23, she lived in a small town in southern Poland. Her apartment was tiny, right above this bakery where she worked all day, and you could actually smell bread coming through the floor sometimes. The place was quiet, the sort where people didn't bother with locked doors, and everyone knew exactly who lived where. One night, she woke up and noticed someone standing right there in her bedroom doorway. She thought it might be her landlady's nephew, Frank, since Frank sometimes stayed in the apartment next door. She called for him, but the figure just stood there, not saying anything. After a second, she could tell it wasn't Frank or anyone else she knew. This thing was tall, like almost 7 feet, and dressed head to toe in black. No face, no hands, nothing. It looked like it had a long coat and, weirdly, a wide-brimmed hat. The hat bothered her most, she said. It stuck out for some reason. It started moving toward her bed. She told me that being afraid doesn't really describe it. It felt like, she said the fear was thicker than fear, like it was something you could almost hear filling the room. She yanked her blanket over her head and started praying, and at some point, the feeling disappeared, and she actually managed to sleep. She never pulled the blankets off again, not once, until morning. Next day, everything was normal, nothing out of place. She talked to her landlady, who said Frank hadn't been by and nobody else had come through. The outside doors were still locked tight, the way they'd left them. Years after that, my older brother David was 16 and woke up from a nightmare. He looked over and saw this same tall shadow standing next to his bed. He said it had a long coat, a wide-brimmed hat, and just this blank space for a face. He screamed for our mom, and when she ran in, it was gone. The strange part? She'd never told him about what happened to her, not even once. He described the same thing she saw, down to the coat and the hat, and there was no way he could have made that up on his own. That wasn't the end of it. A few years back, it was my turn. I woke up in the middle of the night, rolled over, and saw something at the foot of my bed. The same figure, tall, all black, with that coat and hat. But for me, there was no fear. I remember I actually said, "Hello, who are you?" out loud. It just stood there, not facing me directly, almost like it was just waiting for something. I blinked a bunch of times and rubbed my eyes. My left eye kept watering for some reason, but the figure never moved. No sound from it, not a thing. Since it didn't do anything or feel threatening, I just closed my eyes again and drifted off. When I woke up, maybe an hour later, I don't know, it was still dark outside. It was still there, in the exact same spot. I tried speaking to it again, but nothing happened. It didn't turn or vanish or anything, just stood there. I must have fallen asleep a third time, and when I woke up in the morning, it was gone. I've had weird things happen before, sometimes giving me that gut punch that says something is very wrong. But this one, I don't know. It was strange, but not scary. That's, what sticks with me. I can't figure out why my mom and David got that crushing fear, and I got, well, basically nothing. Was it just a thing tied to our family? Some kind of spirit that hangs around us? Or maybe it's all just sleep stuff playing tricks on us, even though the details line up too closely for me. All I know is that for 3 different people, spread over decades, to see the same dark figure with a wide-brimmed hat, well, it's hard to just brush that off. The bloody tower threw him off in a way that still unsettles me. The moment we stepped into the room, tied to the two princes, Edward and his little brother, he crouched down so low I thought he might be unwell. His fur stood straight up. He wouldn't take his eyes off a spot in the far corner. And then, deep in his chest, he started growling. I'd never heard that from him before. The sound rumbled through him like thunder you feel in your feet. Right then, I felt this bitter cold settle over me. It was late autumn, but the air outside had been almost warm, and this wasn't that kind of chill. It was sharp in my bones, almost like I'd never get warm again, and I couldn't really explain why I was so certain of it. We didn't hang around. Just outside, there was this blocked-off little spiral staircase. Wyden walked over to it, tail wagging like mad, and pulled on his lead as though somebody he knew was up there waiting. For a second, I nearly called out. I was that sure someone must be standing on the steps, but there was no one. The strange heaviness from the room was gone there, replaced by something lighter, almost like walking into a friend's kitchen. Once we were back outdoors, Wyden snapped right back to his usual self, focused, calm, just doing his job. I started thinking maybe I'd let all the tower's history get into my head. Near a wall by the courtyard, we stopped to chat with a yeoman warder. All at once, Wyden pulled away from us, hackles up again, and stared hard at a patch of stone that looked exactly the same as the rest. Nothing was there, no tourists, not even a pigeon. The warden saw him and nodded in a way that made me think he'd seen this before. He said his own dog refused to cross that part of the courtyard at night, and some of the tower's ravens and cats kept clear of it too. He asked if Wyden had acted up inside the bloody tower as well. I told him yes. He didn't seem surprised. I couldn't tell you what Wyden sensed in those rooms or corners. All I know is that he's never behaved like that anywhere else in his life. Well, except once, at Durham Cathedral. Most of it didn't bother him. We went through a sunny, quiet walkway right after we got there, and Wyden actually sat down and wagged his tail, waiting like he was greeting someone. There was nobody around, just the sound of my footsteps echoing against the flagstones. I had to tug him away after a bit. Later, near an old cabinet, Jacobean, I think, lots of carved wood and brass, he froze. The cabinet came from the years when hundreds of Scottish prisoners were kept in awful conditions. That much I read on the sign. As we neared it, Wyden just stopped dead and started trembling. I tried coaxing him, but he made it plain he wanted out of there, so I didn't force it. Some people will say dogs notice things we don't. Maybe they pick up on all sorts of stuff, smells, vibrations, things like that. I can't prove what happened with Wyden in those places. All I know for sure is that he was different there, and whatever he noticed, it wasn't anything you or I could see. Something about the way his body filled the doorway, impossibly tall and bent at the neck, stuck with me all these years. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent, the memory comes back sharper than before. This happened a few summers ago, back when I was 15. My family had this little place outside the city. Really, it was an old, creaky cabin, unfinished walls, no heating, and always smelling like dust, pine boards, and maybe something a little musty. My dad bought it so we could get away from the city on weekends, cook outside. I was crazy about it, mostly because of the attic. Now, the attic was barely a room. There was a sagging old mattress, some cardboard boxes with who knows what, a couple of rusty hand tools, and a single outlet in the wall. But to me, it felt like this whole other world. I'd lie up there for hours, listening to music, scrolling through whatever, letting my mind wander while I stared at the boards overhead. The first time I saw him, all of us were packed into the cabin. Dad was back in the city for work, but my mom, little sister, aunt, cousin, and a friend of mine were staying the night. Not enough beds, blankets everywhere, bags piled up, everyone just sleeping wherever they could squeeze. I grabbed the narrow bed in the corner early. I think it was after 3 in the morning. Can't be sure, but it was late. The room was hot, pitch dark, everyone out except me. I still had my headphones in, but my phone was dying, so I took them off and reached for my charger. That's when I saw him. There was someone right by the front door. He was ridiculously tall, had to be at least 7 feet, maybe a little more, and the whole shape of him was completely white. Not like any normal white, more like he was made out of fog, glowing in the moonlight. The ceiling in our cabin is low, so his neck was bent, head tilted off to the side, and he was just looking at my little sister. At first, I figured it was just my brain playing tricks on me, being overtired. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at him. He didn't move. The light passed right across him, and he didn't flicker or disappear. His outline stayed solid, but parts of him sort of shimmered, like smoke that's trying to look human. I was about ready to crawl under the covers and never come back out. But honestly, I'd always been obsessed with creepy stories and unexplained stuff. So another part of me kept thinking, what if this is it? What if I'm actually seeing something real? So, for some reason I still can't explain, I got out of bed and took a few steps toward him. Every step felt harder than the last. My legs were like rubber, and my heart was pounding so loud I thought it'd wake everyone. When I got close enough, I heard breathing. It was this thin, rattly sound, like every breath was a struggle. My whole body went cold. Then he just faded away. No sound, no sudden movement. 1 second he was there, the next it was just empty darkness again. I honestly went outside and looked for him. I know how weird that sounds, but I was calm, almost logical about it. I mean, he was see-through, so I figured he probably couldn't actually hurt me. I checked around the trees and by the fence and the patch of tomatoes near the porch. Nothing. Just the insects buzzing and a little breeze. The next morning, I didn't say a word to anybody. I thought maybe I dreamed it, or maybe it was just exhaustion. Later, I told my friend quietly, but he just sort of nodded like he didn't buy it. That evening, out of nowhere, I said, "There was a huge white man by the door last night." Everything got real quiet. I told them what I saw and how he'd been watching my sister. My mom almost dropped her mug, and my sister started to cry. She refused to sleep by herself after that. For a few days, I kept searching for him around the property, behind the shed, in the clump of birch trees, around the beat-up old wash house. I never found anything. Then, a few weeks after that, we saw him again. It was me, my mom, my sister, and my friend. We took a walk late at night through this abandoned holiday village nearby. Broken windows, collapsed roofs, and weeds everywhere. On the way back, a white figure stepped onto the path in front of us. Same height, same weird, pale shimmer. This time, everyone saw him. Mom stopped. My sister squeezed my arm so hard I still remember it, and my friend put his hands over his face. But I just felt relieved. I hadn't made him up. We didn't have a choice except to keep walking. Before we got too close, a bunch of dogs tore out from behind him, barking like crazy. Mom started yelling and swinging a stick until they backed off. While everyone was distracted by the dogs, I kept my eyes on the figure. He faded off the path, no movement at all, just gone. That night, back at the cabin, I heard the breathing again. Everyone else was asleep, and I could hear their regular breathing, but this sound was rougher, right by my bed. I couldn't see him, but I wasn't scared that time. Honestly, it felt almost comforting, like maybe he was making sure nothing bothered us. Next evening, a bunch of neighbor kids came over, just running around making noise. I was hiding in the attic. Suddenly, everything outside went silent. Then my sister screamed. I ran down and found her sitting on the ground, shaking. She said she'd turned the corner and almost ran into the white figure. "He looked down at me," she kept saying. "He was right there." I checked around the house, calling out, but nobody was there. After that, the rest of the summer passed with nothing else happening. The next year, I spent most of my break at the cottage, just me and a computer I'd brought out, making music. It should have been relaxing, but I always felt like something was nearby. Sometimes I'd feel stared at from a corner, or I'd hear footsteps behind me and spin around to find nothing. One night, heading out to the little bathroom and back, I glanced up at the attic window. There he was. The attic light was on, kind of a dull yellow, and the pale figure was standing behind the glass, looking down. He raised a hand and waved. Not a threatening wave or anything, just a regular, almost friendly wave, like you do to someone you know. I panicked and ran back inside, climbed the stairs, called out, "I'm here, I saw you." The attic was empty. After that night, I'd hear footsteps moving across the ceiling above me, always late, 3 or 4 in the morning, and then that same fragile breathing. Eventually, I whispered into the dark, "I don't know who you are, but you've never hurt me. We can be friends." Not long after, I fell asleep in the attic, phone still in my hand. I woke up unable to move, paralyzed, I guess, in that weird half-awake state. At my feet, I saw 2 long, white legs. Footsteps circled me. Even though I was alone, I didn't feel scared, more like he was checking in one last time. When I could move again, nothing was there. Everything stopped after that. No more footsteps, no more breathing, no more pale figure. The next summer, I stayed at the cabin for weeks, waited, but he never came back. And honestly, I kind of missed him. I know some things can be explained, being tired, seeing shadows, maybe the sleep paralysis thing, but that doesn't explain why my family and my friend saw him too. Even now, I think about who he was, why he showed up, if he belonged to the land or the house or something else. Maybe he was lonely. I never felt like he meant us harm. By the end, he just felt like a quiet stranger who'd stuck around long enough to be sort of a friend. What caught my eye was a thing sitting right under my tree, and it didn't make a bit of sense. So, there's someone, or maybe something, in my family that I've tried to make sense of for years. We call him Oscar. He's been part of my mom's side of the family for generations. I'm not sure whether the stories began with my grandfather's family or my grandmother's, but my mom remembers older relatives mentioning him. For all I know, he might have been around even before any of them. Whenever something goes missing, we ask Oscar to help find it. Sometimes, sure, it's just us being forgetful, but other times, it feels like Oscar has hidden whatever it is on purpose, just to have a bit of fun. He likes small, important objects, keys, glasses, pens, jewelry, things like that. There's a certain way you have to ask for his help. You need to be polite, explain exactly what you're after, and then stop searching. That last part is really important. Once you've genuinely given up, the missing thing often shows up somewhere ridiculous, like right in the middle of an empty table. Other times, it'll turn up in a place that makes no sense, inside a cupboard, maybe next to the coffee, or even tucked behind the ice cream in the freezer. Once, something showed up 3 towns away from where it went missing. You could blame it all on forgetfulness. Quite a few of us have ADHD, me included, so we lose things without any supernatural help. But some incidents had witnesses and none of us could explain them. One time, I left my glasses at home, but later, I found them in my locker at college. Once, my mom lost a spare car key while staying in a rented cottage on the coast. Before she even got home, the key appeared on the mantelpiece at her parents' house. One of my uncles lost a single boot in his own house. It finally turned up in the shed at the bottom of his neighbor's yard. But my most memorable experience with Oscar happened at Christmas. I traveled about 150 miles to stay with relatives for several weeks. Besides planning to spend Christmas together, I'd arranged for my assistant's dog's annual training check, so I'd packed for a long visit. I brought all the family gifts and wrapped them in the spare bedroom. The day before Christmas, my cousin and I counted every present to make sure we hadn't left anyone out. They were already wrapped, but the numbers matched. Then Christmas morning came, and my cousin's wife's present was missing. It was there the day before. My cousin saw it too. We searched the spare room, living room, and hallway, but found nothing. We decided it probably vanished into the Christmas chaos and would turn up once the decorations were packed away. A few days later, I drove home. By the time I arrived, I was so worn out I just left my bags unopened in the kitchen. When I finally wandered into my living room, I looked under my Christmas tree. There was one thing under it: the missing present. The same gift I'd wrapped at my relative's house, 150 miles away. I stared at it for ages, just trying to work out how it got there. I thanked Oscar very politely and called my family to tell them where it had appeared. Not long ago, I lost my glasses after napping in the afternoon. I'm extremely short-sighted, so without them, I'm basically useless. I always leave them on the desk next to my bed. Sometimes my cat knocks them onto the floor, but I checked everywhere: the desk, the rug, under the bed, behind the bedside table, around the cat tree too. Nothing. I even video called my friend Rachel and asked her to help me search, guiding my phone around the room. No luck. Eventually, I asked Oscar for help. I praised his talent, promised I'd be grateful, and then stopped looking. For a couple of hours, I lay on my bed watching videos, holding my phone so close the screen almost touched my nose. When I decided to try again, I suddenly felt like I needed to check the top of my sewing machine. Sitting there was a pair of dress shoes, black ones I think, or maybe they were navy. My glasses were tucked neatly inside the toes. They were nowhere near the bed or the desk, and there's just no logical way they could have ended up inside those shoes. Naturally, I thanked Oscar. You always thank him. According to family tradition, if you don't, exactly 3 more things will go missing. Always 3. And those items might not come back, even if you ask nicely. That's why I keep wondering what Oscar actually is. He's attached to our family, not any particular house. Months might go by without anything happening, and then someone will ring to say he's suddenly active again. He's not cruel. He can be helpful, and sometimes his odd tricks feel almost lucky. But he's playful, proud, and gets offended if people joke about him or act disrespectful. My mother's family is scattered all over northern England and Wales. We have old stories about Irish ancestry, mining towns, and a distant foundling who might have come from a traveling family ages ago. Whether any of that's connected to Oscar, I really can't say. All I know is he's followed our family for generations, and when something disappears, we ask him nicely, then we stop looking. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the house, there's this feeling that something isn't quite right. Like a door you thought was closed is suddenly swinging open, or you hear slow footsteps above your room when everyone else is asleep. That sort of thing keeps happening here, and the weirdest part is, I don't have a solid explanation for any of it. Our house isn't old at all. We moved in as the first owners, so there are no spooky stories about people who lived here before us. Even so, strange stuff started up not too long after we settled in. My dad was the first one who noticed anything odd. He'd be up late and hear a loud thump downstairs, like someone knocked a heavy box off one of the tables. But when he'd check in the morning, nothing was out of place. It was like whatever made the noise vanished. Anyway, everything was where we'd left it. A few months after that, I started hearing noises too, but not the same as my dad's. What I heard was slow footsteps right above my bedroom, moving across the roof. Living in central Mexico, my first thought was someone had climbed up on the roof, maybe a kid or something. I'd just freeze and listen, trying to follow where the steps were going. But any time we checked outside, We never saw anybody, not even footprints in the dust. Here's the weird part. I never heard the crashing noises Dad talked about, and he never heard the footsteps overhead. Only the security cameras got both. There'd be these loud knocks and scraping sounds in the middle of the night, sometimes at 3 or 4 in the morning. We'd play the recordings back and hear it clear as day, but nothing in the house would be moved. Those cameras also picked up these small, glowing shapes now and then, like drifting orbs floating across the screen. I know bugs or dust can look like that on night vision, but some of these moved in odd little zigzags, not how dust floats. Other times, we'd hear soft whistling in the hallway, or the sound of bare feet slapping quietly from one room to the next. It wasn't every night. Sometimes weeks would go by with nothing, and we'd start hoping it was all over. I don't see myself as someone who's sensitive to this kind of thing. My family, my mom, my cousin Ginger, they're the ones with all the weird stories. I'm the person who tries to find a normal reason for everything. That's why the moving door got to me. One afternoon, my partner and I were just sitting in the living room when we noticed the storage room door downstairs swinging open and closed real slow. I thought my dad had gone in there, so I called upstairs to check. He called back, saying he hadn't been near it. Both my parents were upstairs, which meant it was just me and my partner on the ground floor. My partner got spooked right away. He kept whispering that maybe someone had broken in. When we told my dad, he just came down, glanced in the room, closed the door, and went back upstairs without a word. He was so calm, it almost annoyed me. He'd seen enough weird stuff by then, I guess. But my partner couldn't stop staring at that door for the rest of the evening. A few weeks later, I was home alone and came downstairs. That same door was wide open. I checked the footage. The recording showed my parents leaving earlier, me still upstairs, and no one else coming in. At some point while I was alone, the door just slowly opened by itself. The camera caught every second. But the creepiest thing happened later. One evening, when just my partner and I were home, he kept saying he felt someone else in the house. I tried to calm him down. Both doors locked, windows shut. I'd watched my folks leave. Then, right in front of us, that storage room door started opening again. This time, we went over to it together. We stood there, watching. The door opened a little, wobbled, then drifted most of the way closed. My partner checked for drafts, even tried waving his hand in front of the gap. He turned to me and said, I could see the wind opening it, but how would wind pull it back like that? We just stood there while the door opened and closed, weakly, like someone was tugging at it from the other side and couldn't quite get it shut. Then, out of nowhere, it slammed, loud enough to echo all through the house. Neither of us was touching it. That kind of thing kept ending up on camera. Another time, we had this big burlap sack full of dried corn on the kitchen floor. Suddenly, it tipped over for no reason. No pets, no breeze, nothing touching it. And then there's the spare room nobody uses. Every so often, when we go in, there are thin little marks in the dust, like fingers dragged across the top of a shelf. Not a whole hand, just trails. Small things move too, like keys or a comb, and we find them a little out of place, but nothing ever disappears completely. One day, we found a set of fingerprints on the glass of a cabinet that had just been wiped, and on another day, a whole handprint faded into view on a different glass panel. I asked everyone, my parents, Ginger, my partner, and nobody said they'd touched it. Some people who hear this stuff say it's duendes. They say those little creatures like to play tricks, move things around, and mess with people in their homes. Others think it's just a spirit passing through. Honestly, I'm not sure what to think anymore. But that door, the sounds, the marks in the dust, they make it hard to just laugh it off. Nothing's actually tried to hurt us, but I keep wondering if whatever's here might not be as harmless as it seems. years back, my husband and I moved into this small house to save up money and get ourselves back on track. It was meant to be temporary, just a simple place so we could focus on the future. We furnished it with secondhand stuff. Our old blue love seat barely fit against the wall, but we made it work. Those early days were honestly good. Then, things started to change, and not in ways I could explain. Every so often, little objects would be somewhere they shouldn't. A mug I left on the kitchen island would end up on the windowsill. The television remote, which we kept in the living room, would be in the bathroom cabinet. It was weird, but we joked about it. After a while, the feeling in the house shifted. The jokes stopped. Both of us started catching glimpses of shadows where they shouldn't be, like seeing something dart through the hallway when I was folding laundry, or thinking I saw movement in the corner of my eye while reading. My husband, Ellis, he started mentioning it too. Not directly at first. I'd ask, "Did you just walk past?" And he'd look at me funny. Then came the kitchen cabinet morning. We woke up and every cabinet, above and below the counter, was wide open. I accused Ellis of trying to scare me. He got frustrated and insisted he hadn't touched them. We argued about it for a while. Now, thinking back, I know he was telling the truth. The arguments just kept getting worse from there. We'd snap at each other over nothing. A dish in the sink, the porch light left on, Ellis not answering right away when I asked if he'd fed the cat. Things that had never mattered suddenly set me off. Usually, it was me starting it. It wore us both down. We'd go days barely speaking. I remember one night, Ellis slept in his truck just to get away from the tension. For a minute, I really thought we were done for. But we didn't give up on us. One night, after another pointless argument about the laundry not being folded, Ellis went to bed and I stayed up with the TV on. Reruns, nothing I was actually watching. The house was dark except for the flicker and this dull yellow glow from the old lamp in the corner. I was still stewing over the fight when I felt like someone was standing right next to the couch. It was so strong that, without thinking, I turned to say something to Ellis, assuming he'd come back in. Except he wasn't there. Standing just a few feet away was a tall, dark figure, taller than the doorway. I think, now I'm not so sure. It didn't have a face or any features at all. It was just this solid black shape standing dead still, sort of watching. I gasped, too loud. I blinked, and it was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. I ran straight into the bedroom and woke Ellis. As soon as I started trying to explain, before I could get it all out, he asked, "Did it look like a tall black shadow, shaped like a person?" His voice was shaky. That's when my stomach dropped. It turns out Ellis had seen the same thing weeks earlier, standing near the kitchen hallway, but he hadn't told me, said he didn't want to make it worse or make me more anxious. We decided then and there we needed to leave as soon as we could. By spring, we were out of that place. After we moved, it was like a weight lifted. We still had arguments, but nothing like before. The tension was just gone. I get sleep paralysis sometimes. Been that way since college, so that's nothing new. But outside of that, our new place has felt normal. There's a detail that sticks with me. The couple that moved in after us, I think their names were Tom and Heather, split up before the year was out. From what I heard, it ended badly. They don't even talk now. But whenever I think about that house, the kitchen drawers open, the fighting, I still find myself wondering if something else was in there with us, changing us in ways we couldn't see. After we came home from the hospital that Saturday, stepping into Mom's house felt wrong. It was as if something heavy settled in my stomach, almost made me feel sick. I still don't know if Mom passed late that night, maybe around 11 or so, or early into Sunday morning, like 2 or 3. I just know something was off. That night, back at Joyce's, I couldn't sleep, kept tossing and turning, and my stomach just wouldn't settle. I felt so queasy. I even tried to make myself throw up, hoping it would help. There was this awful pounding in my head, and every time I closed my eyes, the dizziness got worse. I figured maybe I was getting sick, so I tried to let it go. That night was full of nightmares, the kind that wake you up, sweaty and out of breath. In those dreams, Mom was dying again and again. She'd try to tell me something. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't make out the words. I'd wake up, then slip back into the same nightmare. It felt like being stuck on a broken record. I kept repeating to myself, "It's okay, I'll see her tomorrow, it'll be fine." But that next day just didn't come the way I thought. When I woke, my dad was standing in the doorway, and he told me. I wasn't even surprised, really. It's weird. Mom was okay the day before, but some part of me already knew. Things haven't felt normal since. Now, when I'm alone in the house, it's like someone else is in the room. Not really a person, more like there's something hiding in the corners, watching. Sometimes I see these flickers, almost shapes at the edge of my eyes. They're gone when I turn, but I know I saw something. And my dog, who used to just curl up beside me, now stands right next to me, hackles up, barking at empty space. Happens near the basement door sometimes. That door keeps opening by itself. At first, I figured it was a draft or that the latch was loose, but I checked it over and tightened it. Still, I'll be upstairs and I hear the soft creak and it's open again. Even the security lights outside the back door, there are 2 of them, not very bright, keep flicking on and off at night. There shouldn't be anything out there, but every time I check, it's just empty grass and quiet. I used to blame foxes or maybe rabbits, but I've never found any tracks. All this has gotten worse lately. Ever since then, the house hasn't felt like mine. I just wish I knew what was happening, or at least that someone would believe me. Some nights, the shadows in our old house don't just flicker at the edge of your vision. They move with purpose, like they're watching. The strangest part isn't that we live with them, but that we've all had to act like it's normal. I'm Andres. Well, Andres Vela now, and I've lived in the same house since I was a baby. That's really the problem. It's not just the house, it's the things living here with us, haunting me in ways I still struggle to describe. The oddest memories linger from way back. Chairs sliding across the wooden floor for no reason, voices whispering from inside the walls late at night. When I was small, I was scared stiff. My parents always acted like nothing was wrong, but even as a kid, I could tell they were just pretending for my sake. As I got older, it was obvious they couldn't keep pretending. Around the time I was 15, no wait, I think I just turned 16, my parents finally told me what really happened. The last owner, a woman named Monica J., had died by suicide in a small apartment a few streets away. The police called it a suicide, but there were strange details, things that didn't make sense. My parents thought that's what left the house cursed. I didn't doubt them for a second. My parents are heavy into their Catholic faith, actually deep in a group called Opus Sancta. They brought a priest over to bless the place and even held a mass for Monica's soul. After that, they said the haunting was over and told us not to talk about it anymore. But the haunting didn't stop. The spirits here act nothing like the stories I heard growing up. People think ghosts pop in and out, but here, if one passes close, your eyes blur, like the world's gone out of focus. At night, shadow forms crawl along the tan walls and slip through dark corners. I've seen a woman, probably Monica, and a little boy in an old black suit floating by like they belonged here. There's a big statue of the Virgin Mary in our courtyard, maybe a little over 4 feet tall, and one night I was sure I saw her crying. The tears looked real. At first, I thought it was just the sculptor's detail, but when I put my hand to the statue, the tears were wet. I nearly dropped my phone. I was so shocked. After a while, we all sort of learn to live with this strangeness. We know something's wrong, but it's part of daily life now. Most of the spirits don't scare me much anymore, except for one. There's one thing here that still frightens me more than anything else. That's why I'm sharing this, because it started again. This thing mostly torments my older sister, Dorothy. It started about 8 years back. She told us she'd wake up every night with a tall, dark figure watching her from beside the bed. She was so terrified that she slept with our dog, a Labrador named Blue, who's normally super alert. But Dorothy told us this thing could make Blue sleep so deeply she couldn't wake her, no matter how much she pushed her shoulder or called her name. It was like the thing had power over the dog, too. It got worse. Dorothy would find deep bruises on her arms and feel this crushing dread, like something was pressing her down. Desperate, our parents called the priest again. He said it could be something not human, a demon, maybe. He gave us holy water and blessed salt to scatter around Dorothy's room, plus statues of saints for protection. The thing smashed those statues to pieces, and nothing we tried would keep it away. The priest said Dorothy was dealing with an infestation, and only faith would save her. I'm not really Catholic, and I can't say I ever believed that would fix it. We tried anyway, but nothing changed. I'm talking about this because recently, the same thing has come back for me. The first time I felt it, I must have been 17, reading a book at home by myself. Actually, it was a fantasy novel, the kind I'd loved when I was about 10. It was late afternoon, just after 4, and the sun was hazy through my window. Suddenly, this heavy force slammed inside me. I stopped reading because I felt so sick and numb, not like normal tiredness, more like I'd been beaten up. My muscles ached, colder than anything I'd felt. I remember looking up just in time to see a huge black form gliding towards me, so big it blocked out what little sunlight there was, plunging my room into near darkness. I started shaking all over. Then, without a sound, it pushed its voice into my head. It didn't talk, exactly, but it filled my thoughts with ugliness, telling me I was worthless, broken, just nothing. I covered my ears and begged it to go. Out loud, I think, but it kept at me for ages. Finally, it left. Afterward, I was drenched in sweat, my body numb, and all I could do was sob. The worst part was the sense that it had gotten inside, like I wasn't even safe in my own body anymore. About an hour after that, my mom came home. I told her everything, even asked her to take me to a doctor because I was scared I was losing my mind. We did all the tests. Everything came back normal, physically, mentally, which only made me more sure that whatever I'd experienced was real. Now that presence has returned, and I don't know how much more I can take. Priests haven't helped us, and I'm nearly out of hope. I can't keep living like this, always waiting for the shadow to come back. Nights can get too quiet sometimes, like the stillness is waiting for something to happen. Last night, the creaks and knocks in my room felt sharper than usual, and then the pressure against my head started. I don't really know what to make of it, but here's what actually happened. I couldn't sleep and got stuck on my phone, just scrolling through TikTok. It was maybe midnight, or no, a bit after that, because the room was pitch black and my phone screen felt way too bright. One of those tarot reading videos popped up, and for some reason, it felt aimed right at me. I watched the full reading, hoping it'd help me relax or make sense of my anxious mood. Out of nowhere, I got this wave of unease. My arms felt prickly, and my chest started pounding. I told myself to put the phone down and try to sleep, which I did. Then, as the clock hit exactly 3 a.m., I checked. It was like a bolt of fear went through me from my toes up to my scalp. It seriously felt like something invisible started creeping inside me, slowly moving upwards. Moments after, the room made this long, groaning sound, the kind of noise you hear when an old house settles in the middle of the night. I tried to write it off, but then there were these light knocks, quick little taps, almost like footsteps, but softer, just enough to make me freeze for a second. I grabbed my phone again and switched on some ASMR to calm down. Soft whispers and gentle tapping. It helped for a bit, but then the room's temperature dropped, and I went from sweating to shivering in maybe a minute. I remember pulling my blanket up, but it didn't help much. Lying on my stomach, I tried to drift off. That's when a name started echoing in my head. Adam. Over and over. Adam. 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 Then, out of nowhere, it switched to Eve. And as soon as the name Eve was there, I felt an invisible force pressing my head deeper into the pillow. The pressure was strong, like a magnet, I guess, pushing my whole body into the mattress, and I couldn't move at all. At the back of my head, I felt this weird pulsing, and with every pulse, there was a sound in my mind. Metal hitting metal, over and over. Clang, clang, clang. A voice whispered, real quiet inside me, saying, Eve, Eve, Eve. And this, my name, is healing. I know it sounds strange, but it was both terrifying and, in the weirdest way, sort of comforting. I tried hard to open my eyes, but couldn't. I figured I was in sleep paralysis, so I focused on wiggling my toes, then my fingers. Eventually, I managed a little movement, but every time I tried to sit up, it felt like I got yanked back down, paralyzed again, with that banging in my ears and the pressure on my head. Finally, I got free, and after that, sleep was just not happening. The feeling of being stuck, pinned down, stuck with me even after I sat up. I kept thinking maybe it was just my mind messing with me after the tarot reading, but a few nights back, I'd had this dream where I got chased by something, like a demon or, something I don't really want to describe. Now, I'm honestly nervous about trying to sleep again. My fiancé and I have been watching a ridiculous amount of paranormal videos on YouTube lately. Our 5-year-old son told us on Christmas Eve that he heard tapping on his window that night. I thought maybe my fiancé was fooling around, but he said he wasn't. I just figured our son might have been making it up, or maybe he wanted some attention. Last night, something happened that really spooked us. My fiancé woke me up early in the morning, probably close to dawn. I'd fallen asleep on the couch while he worked late. He said he heard the screen door creak and then slam, that kind of sharp noise you know right away. When he turned, he saw the door move, just a little, like someone nudged it. He went out to check, but there was nothing there. The part that got us both rattled was after that, he noticed 2 scratches on his chest. Not deep, but they definitely weren't there before, and he hadn't been anywhere that could have scratched him. So that's what's been going on. Weird knocks, sudden scratches, strange names in my head, and that heavy, magnetic pressure. I don't know if it all ties together, but it's been unsettling, to say the least. Even now, thinking about that scratching noise under the door, I get a weird feeling, like something's watching me from the dark. This was in an old apartment building we lived in, back in Chicago. The place always gave off an uneasy vibe, like there was something waiting around the corners. There was this rusty iron gate you had to go through to reach our building. Past the gate, there was a short cement path, maybe 4 or 5 seconds to cross, leading right up to a set of chipped concrete stairs. When you climbed those, you saw the windows of the first-floor apartment. To your right, there was a beat-up green door that led into the main part of the building. Once inside, you ended up in this cramped room with 2 doors. The left one went into the first-floor apartment, and the right one opened to the staircase that wound up to our place on the 2nd floor. The stairs weren't a perfect spiral, but they twisted up in a narrow shaft, creaky with every step. At the top, you reached another door, and when you came through that, you'd be standing smack in our living room. The day I'm talking about, I was maybe 15. It was late afternoon. I remember the light coming in sideways, sort of yellowish. I was sitting on the couch, super into watching some anime, barely noticing anything else. Then, I heard the clank of the first door opening downstairs, followed by the second door to the staircase. It happened one after the other, not even a pause between. I figured, okay, my mom was home early from work, or maybe my brother Heath was getting back from wrestling. Honestly, I was relieved. Being alone in that place could get pretty uncomfortable after a while. I heard footsteps on the stairs, each step echoing up the shaft, and when I glanced at the bottom of the apartment door, I saw a shadow, like the shape of someone shifting around right on the other side. Normally, there'd be the sound of keys rattling, then the lock turning, but this time, there was nothing, just that unmoving shadow. Then came this slow scratching sound, like fingernails dragging from the top of the door down to the bottom. It was steady and sharp. I told myself Heath was messing with me. He'd play pranks sometimes, though never anything quite like this. I tried to ignore it, turned the volume up a notch, but the scratching just went on. It grew louder, more desperate, almost angry, if that makes sense, and the shadow stayed put, not shifting away. At some point, I got fed up. I pushed myself off the couch and stomped over to the door, ready to catch Heath doing his thing. I yanked the door open. There was nobody in the hallway. No mom, no brother, nobody. Just the still air and that weird echo you get in old buildings. I looked behind the door anyway. Still nothing. But then I noticed the scratches. They were fresh, rough grooves running down the paint, some with little flakes of wood at the edges. I don't know how I didn't see them before. My breath caught. I actually gasped, which is something I hate admitting. I took off down the stairs, past the old shoe rack, and out into the tiny entry room. As soon as I was out front, I grabbed my phone and called Heath. He picked up, out of breath, and said he was still at practice. That's when I realized whoever, or whatever, had been at my door wasn't anyone I knew. After that, I just remember the muffled quiet of the building, like it was holding its breath. I didn't see that shadow again, but sometimes I think about that afternoon, the scratches still there on the door, and the sound of something waiting just out of sight. It was one of those muggy summer mornings, with a quiet drizzle tapping at the old farmhouse windows. I woke up feeling sort of groggy, thinking only about all the boxes waiting for me to move. But then I saw something small and shiny on that tiny ledge next to my bed, and everything felt off. A few years back, right before heading back to college after the summer, I was at my dad's place getting all my stuff together. I'd been dating my boyfriend, let's call him Clark, for about 2 years at that point. For our anniversary, the previous fall, he gave me a ring I'd actually picked out myself from Pandora. It was a limited edition, and I hadn't seen anything like it before then. The ring was dainty, but meant a lot to me. A silver band with little scalloped edges, like tiny petals going all the way around, and a sweet red heart right in the center. I wore it every day, always kept an eye on it. That detail's actually kind of important for what happened. The night before moving, I'd been rushing around, tossing jewelry and other stuff into a padded pouch, and I realized I'd packed my everyday ring away too. I just shrugged, figuring I'd rather have it packed than risk losing it during the sweaty mess of moving day. I zipped the pouch, stuffed it deep in my duffel, and didn't think much more about it. 2 of my closest friends, Betty and Fraser, were in town to help with the move. They'd driven in from a couple states away and came to crash at my dad's house since it was on the drive toward campus. We ate leftover pasta, watched some dumb reality show, and talked about how much junk we each had to move the next day. Then, we all crashed in different bedrooms because early mornings aren't exactly our thing. When I woke up, just as the light was coming through the curtains, I saw this ring placed on that little shelf, barely wide enough to fit a mug, let alone jewelry. I stared at it a second, thinking maybe I'd dropped my own ring, but when I picked it up, it wasn't mine. It was the exact same ring, same scalloped band, same size, but instead of a red heart, this one had a clear, almost glass-like heart in the middle. I just stood there, holding it, feeling this weird prickle on my arms. I couldn't remember ever seeing it before, and it definitely hadn't been on the ledge the night before. I headed over to where Betty and Fraser were still wrapped up in blankets, yawning and trying to wake up. I held up the ring and half joked, "Okay, who's playing tricks? Did one of you leave your ring in my room? It's so weird, we all have the same taste now." They both looked up at me, totally blank. Betty said, "No, that's not mine, never seen it before." Fraser just blinked and shook his head, not even fully awake. I could tell by their faces they weren't joking. If they'd owned a ring like that, I would have noticed by now. I started thinking maybe Clark had gotten 2 rings, maybe a clear one and a red one, and forgotten to mention it. I grabbed my phone and texted him, asking if he bought 2 and maybe left one at my dad's house by accident, or something like that. He texted right back, saying no, he only ever bought me the red one, and he was sure. Still not convinced, I asked my dad's girlfriend about it. She's the only other woman who stayed in the house, and she tends to notice things. I described the ring, and she said she'd never seen anything like it and definitely didn't own it. I thought maybe I'd gotten mixed up and never packed the red ring in the first place, so I tore open my bag and found the jewelry pouch. The original ring was there, looking just like I remembered. Red heart, scalloped edges, no scratches or anything. So now I was holding 2 identical rings, except the hearts were different colors. Both fit me perfectly, both real, both from who knows where. Later, I checked the Pandora website, but the original ring was gone from their listings, and there was no version with a clear heart anywhere. One thing that's maybe worth mentioning, the house is really old, like built in the 1700s old, and it's kind of famous in the area for being, well, haunted. It's the original homestead of the town, so it's not short on ghost stories, and sometimes you hear weird clinks at night, but I haven't had anything this physical happen before or since. I never did figure out where that second ring came from, or how it ended up on that narrow ledge in my room. It's just this strange little thing that happened, and every so often I take both rings out and try to figure it out all over again. Sometimes I remember the sound of gravel scraping in the basement just before everything would go dark and quiet for my brother. Little things like that have stuck with me from our time in the house my dad built. It's this huge place sitting right across from an old plantation house where our neighbors lived. We had 2 big, ancient trees in the front. Folks around here used to tell a story about a teacher who was hanged nearby for teaching slave children to read. That stuck with me, and not in a good way. It wasn't long after we moved in that strange things started happening. At first, it was just me, and when I brought it up, my family would laugh it off. But after a few weeks, anytime I mentioned something weird, my parents and my brother would get quiet. Eventually, they let on they'd all had their own weird run-ins around the house. The basement was huge, biggest I've ever seen, honestly. Most of it was finished, but you could open some plain white doors and find unfinished spaces, and then there was a finished office off to one side. Up on the wall of that office, about 3 feet high, was a little door to a crawl space under the laundry room. One day, Dad had my brother, Andrew, crawl in there to spread some stone around in the far corner. We'd been in the house for years by then. Andrew and I were both about halfway through high school. Suddenly, Andrew stormed into my room, which was 3 flights up from that crawl space. He was furious, asking if I was messing with him. I told him no, and he explained what had happened. He said every time he got to the far end of that crawl space, he'd hear a woman laughing right above him. Then, while she kept on giggling, she'd reach in, flick off the light, and slam the little door shut. He'd end up crawling back in the pitch dark, hands and knees scraping the gravel. He said it happened 3 or 4 times, but he'd never told anyone because, honestly, who'd believe that? When he saw I was shocked, he realized it couldn't have been me. Next time Dad wanted the gravel finished, I went down and sat on the carpet by that crawl space door, flashlight in hand, just watching the door and the switch. The basement felt colder than usual, and the only sound was Andrew scooping and the stones crunching. I kept my flashlight steady, half expecting something, but nothing happened that time. The woman's laugh never came back while I was there. Still, that thick, uneasy quiet always settled in when you talked about it. There's something else I want to mention, a dream I had around the time I found out I was pregnant last year. One of my college friends, Diane, had died in a car accident right after she moved closer to me. We'd planned to catch up the weekend after, but she was gone by then. It still feels like I'm leaving something out when I talk about her. That night, I had this dream where I was going to meet Diane in a city, but it wasn't a normal city. You could only get there if someone guided you. In the dream, I rode in a weird car with this tall, silver-haired driver. He looked young, but his hair just gleamed. He didn't say a word, just drove us through what looked like huge waves covering the road. We finally arrived at this city that looked both magical and, honestly, sort of ordinary. I saw Diane at a restaurant, and we talked for ages, just like old times. She was happy, really happy. She told me I'd love my baby, that we'd become best friends as my kid grew up. I could see her in a field, running and laughing with a child. Couldn't tell if it was a boy or girl. My husband and I had decided not to find out the gender. I asked her if she knew my baby. She just smiled and said yes, that they played together all the time. When I tried to ask if it was a boy or girl, she laughed. Your husband wants to be surprised. I'm not spoiling it. After dinner, we stepped into streets full of people and lights, almost like a fair. I begged her to come back with me, or at least let me stay and shop with her, but she shook her head and said, "You know you can't stay." We hugged, and I went back with the silent driver. That dream stuck with me, like I still think about how real it felt. It brought me some kind of peace about losing her, even if I can't explain why. One last thing. My little brother Mason, when he was 4. I was 6 then, and Mom only told me this story later. Mason was a typical little kid, into trucks and monsters and so on. But one night, when Mom tucked him in, he told her about jumping out of a plane. He said he was the last to jump, that he had something strapped to his front, maybe a parachute, or he might have said a big bag. I forget. What scared Mom was the way he described everything. The U.S. Army uniform, the planes inside, and the boots, which he called big brown boots with laces. He talked about jumping to save people, then fell asleep. We didn't have a TV or internet then. No way for him to know about any of that. It shook Mom up for weeks. Mason doesn't remember any of it now. Our grandma is convinced Mason and I have some psychic thing from her side. Sometimes I do wonder if she's right. So that's it. A house with strange sounds, a dream that felt like more than a dream, and a little brother with memories he never should have had. Makes you realize there's a lot out there we don't really get. That night, though, it was like the whole world had shifted around me, and suddenly nothing was where it should be. This happened in 2021, when curfews and restrictions still kept the streets almost empty. I was driving home, taking a route I'd done countless times before. Annabelle was next to me in the passenger seat, and we were right in the middle of a terrible argument. I lost my temper and hit her. Inside the car, it felt heavy, like all the air was pressing down on us. I could hear myself shouting, and she was crying, scared of me. And outside, there was this thick mist. It was so dense, I could barely see 5 car lengths ahead. We were going down this long, straight road, the kind that usually feels endless at night. Eventually, I stopped at a red traffic light. Annabelle tried to get out, but I leaned over and stopped her from opening the door. After that light, there's always another one about half a kilometer down, a green one I always look for, because I've driven that stretch so many times. This time, when I pulled away, I kept expecting that second light. I kept glancing at the dashboard clock, but the light never showed up. We were still arguing, voices echoing off the windshield, but when I looked out, something felt off. The shops looked familiar, but not on that street. It had that weird feeling, like when you recognize a place but can't figure out how you got there. I finally asked Annabelle, "Where are we?" She stared out the window for a second, then said, "Belleville South." That answer just took the fight right out of me. We'd started out in Durbanville. Somehow, without turning or hitting any intersections, we ended up in Belleville South, a place you'd have to drive at least 15 minutes to reach. But for me, only a few seconds had passed between waiting for the light and realizing we weren't on the road I knew. I couldn't figure it out. I wasn't drunk, hadn't taken anything, just angry. The road we were on was dead straight, no nearby turnoffs, and it mostly runs through open patches of land. The nearest road that could have led us that far was kilometers away. I don't go in for God or miracles, not really. I've never thought much about fate either, but sometimes I get stuck thinking about what would have happened if we hadn't ended up somewhere unexpected that night. It snapped me out of something dark, scared me enough to stop, to actually see her sitting there, sobbing. I still feel uneasy thinking about it. Makes my arms prickle, if I'm honest. Here's another odd part. Annabelle was there during 2 other strange incidents in my life. I'm not saying she caused anything, but it does bug me that whenever I've brought up that night, she either brushes it off or acts like it was nothing unusual. Either she remembers differently, or maybe it just didn't matter to her. I've looked for other stories like this. People talk about lost time, about driving straight but winding up somewhere else. One thing that crops up a lot is thick fog, that really thick white kind. And that night, it was like the inside of a cloud out there. I really don't know. Most of the time, I need things to make sense. I want explanations. But every time I run through the memory, there's no way a straight road should have taken us that far off course. The thing that never made sense to me was Mum writing angry words right on the refrigerator door. There was always something odd about that kitchen, but what unsettled me most were the little details that kept piling up, especially after everything else had happened in that room. My grandmother practiced what she used to call white witchcraft. She did cleansing rituals, burned sage, lavender sometimes I think, not just sage. And she experimented with a spirit board in her younger days. Something bad supposedly happened during one of those sessions, but my family never spelled out what. They'd just go quiet when I brought it up. The house itself always felt like it had a story. Before we moved in, an old man died there, in the kitchen specifically. I never found out much about him or the circumstances, but in the end, that kitchen became the center of everything. Mum would rather be in there than anywhere else. She even started sleeping there after a while, and she obsessed over renovating it. Sometimes she'd just stand at the counter, staring at the tiles, not eating, not doing anything. My parents bought that place about 2013. At first, nothing seemed off. I was only a kid then, so maybe I missed things, but the worst stuff came later anyway. Their relationship got more and more chaotic. Fights became constant, and some of them were just, well, my dad changing the locks, Mum shouting through the window, that sort of thing. There was never any peace. After a couple years, they separated, but before that, things at home got nearly impossible to follow. It was lock changes, secret calls, arguments over who was allowed in the house. Mum's behavior back then could swing wildly. Once, she humiliated my dad right in the living room and acted like it was the funniest thing. When the house was officially hers, she seemed almost relieved. Dad stayed there with his new girlfriend, Edna, and her daughter for a bit. Both later said they'd had unsettling feelings in the house. They didn't explain much, but just hearing it made me wonder whether it was more than just Mum feeling that way. When my parents split, Mum, my sister, and I moved in with Gran for a bit. Mum felt more herself there. She talked like she always had, stopped laughing or mumbling to herself, just settled down. That was when she and Gran started bringing in crystals, little protective things, doing cleansing. When we went back, those things didn't stick around. Years later, after my boyfriend started coming over, I found one of Gran's crystals and set it up on the kitchen shelf. Maybe I just wanted something to be different. That's when I started thinking more about the change in Mum over the years. For years, she'd get on my dad for drinking. That was one of their worst arguments. But after the separation, she became a serious drinker herself. Not just on weekends, almost every day, sometimes before lunch, which was weird for her. During arguments, her whole face could shift. She'd close her eyes, eyelids twitching fast, and when she opened them, her voice got colder. If I challenged her, even gently, she'd say things, call me names no mother should ever say. Once, she even smashed her own phone with a cricket bat, left the pieces on the kitchen table for days, like a warning. She started talking to herself, sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes in the hallway. She'd curse at empty corners, laugh at nothing, answer questions nobody had asked. Then she started posting strange things online, warnings about creatures under beds, stuff about demons, and these edited photos that made the house look darker than it was. She decorated the place with black ornaments and skulls and stuck weird little objects along the windowsill. Whatever she was going for, it wasn't comfort. After every visit to Gran's house, which always smelled like rosemary and felt clean, Mum made my sister and me stop at the threshold and repeat a sentence about rejecting bad luck. She made us say it a bunch of times before she'd let us all the way inside. That always stuck with me. It was like she was trying to keep something out, or maybe keep something in. She changed how she looked, too. Wore only black makeup, dyed her hair darker, and became super sensitive to smells. Perfume would give her headaches. She could tell if I hid a scented wipe in my backpack, which wasn't normal. Sandalwood was the worst for her. It'd make her gag, and that was odd because sandalwood's everywhere in our area. My boyfriend once brought me a bouquet of white tulips. As soon as I walked in, Mum stared at them and asked, "Why did he bring real flowers? They're just going to die. He should have bought plastic." She meant it. She hated real flowers in the house. She never liked my boyfriend, even though he always tried to be polite. She'd tell me I should find someone more grown up. She actually called him a scruffy troublemaker once, which didn't sound like her, not at all. Everyone else liked him. Dad liked him, my stepmother liked him, even my siblings. He never gave Mum an actual reason to be suspicious. He told me, and this was ages before I'd explained any of this, that every time he came over, he felt a strong pressure across his shoulders, like someone pushing down. The moment he left, it vanished. He said that before I told him anything about the kitchen or the house, a friend of mine who's into spiritual stuff said the house felt oppressive. She didn't know the full story either. Maybe it's just suggestion, but it matched what I'd felt. As I got older, I started confronting Mum more. I questioned her and wouldn't accept her answers as gospel. We still had good moments, and I never stopped loving her. But any small disagreement could turn so sharp, and everything kept ending up in the kitchen. The kitchen and the living room were pretty much one big space, no wall between. One night, a car lost control outside and crashed straight into the house. Smash, right into the kitchen. The sound was so loud, it made my ears ring. The counter was torn loose, and glass was everywhere. Out of all the parts of the house, it hit that room. After that, Mum obsessed over renovating the kitchen. The work took forever. For almost 2 years, we had plywood where the cabinets should have been. If friends came over, I'd tell them not to look behind the curtain because it was still being fixed. Then, all of a sudden, Mum said she was selling the house. She started rushing to finish the kitchen, floors, paint, everything. But just as quickly, she changed her mind. She called me and said, "I can't sell now. I love the new kitchen too much." She stopped using the bedrooms, slept on a mattress in the kitchen and living area for months. She even wrote angry stuff, just big, black, permanent marker words all over the fridge. Sometimes she'd mutter that people were watching us. Someone in the family said she might be cursed, but I never figured out who said it first, or if anyone took it seriously. I should say this. Mum has a history of mental illness. For the longest time, I didn't consider how much that could explain. I was too stuck in the middle, just trying to get through each day. When I finally moved out, it became clearer. Sleep deprivation, trauma, years of fighting, alcohol, those things explain a lot. I'm not denying it, but the kitchen connection still gets at me. She could wake up at strange hours, like she was listening for something. She didn't like visitors. She'd leave one door open when she was outside, even if it was cold out. She said it was to air out bad energy, but I think she just didn't want the house closed. Then she told me I had to move out, and I had less than a week. After I left, she scrubbed my room clean, like not a single trace I'd ever been there. My sister's room stayed the same because she was allowed to keep living there. Part of me wonders whether she pushed me out because I kept questioning her. My sister never picked a fight, so she got to stay. I just miss who she used to be. Living with her felt like flipping a coin. Good day or bad day, you never knew. I had counseling growing up because of what was happening at home. After a long time, I accepted there probably wasn't going to be one clear answer. The weirdness wasn't sudden. It dragged out for years. Sometimes I tell myself, maybe it was just the house, or maybe the kitchen was her safe place when she was struggling. Maybe the alcohol and depression changed her more than I realized. Or maybe there was something about that house, and especially that kitchen, none of us ever understood. I'm just trying to put the pieces together without losing my grip on what was real and what might not have been. But there were a few times when something didn't happen the way I expected, and that's what got under my skin a little. Skeptics talk about the planchette moving because of us, that it's our subconscious minds doing the work. I get that, really, I do. But I've had nearly 9 years of these sessions, and it's always been the same presence. The first time, I asked her for her name, and the planchette spelled out Marie, slow and kind of shaky. After that, I asked if I could call her in the future, and she said yes. So I set up a routine. Every session, I'd start the same way. "Marie, are you here?" Most times, she'd answer quickly, with the planchette moving right off the bat. Marie described herself as a guide, not a spirit guide, just a guide. She told me she looked after a group of people she called her charges. She said her job involved helping these charges cross over to what she called peace, which she described as a higher realm. She also said she attended life reviews, where people's experiences could be seen with more understanding. She mentioned I was one of about 40 under her care. Usually, she'd show up, 98% of the time, I'd say, but sometimes she just didn't. My partner and I would sit there, asking for Marie, waiting. Nothing would happen. The board would just stay still, completely still, like maybe the board itself was tired. We'd eventually give up, pack it away, and try again the next day or 2 days later. Then she'd be there again. Whenever that happened, I'd ask her where she'd been. Sometimes she'd say another charge needed her. Other times, she'd tell me she'd been at a life review. One session stands out to me. We'd barely started, and I was mid-question when the planchette jumped in before I finished. It spelled out, "Must go. A charge is leaving. Peace is close." Then, nothing. The board just stopped. There was another time when I had a full list of questions, front and back of one of those yellow notepads, I think, and I was going through them fast, almost without breathing. Suddenly, Marie wouldn't answer anymore. She told me, well, she spelled out, that I was asking too much, and it was disturbing her. The session just sort of ended with that. After that, I changed how I used the board. Now, I try to keep the questions focused on growth and spiritual stuff, since that seems to be what she cares about. I don't want to push it or treat the connection like a game. Every now and then, Marie gives us details, words, and things we don't recognize. Later, I look them up, sometimes weeks later, sometimes right away, and find out they make sense or are true. I know skeptics would say we probably heard those things years ago and just forgot. Maybe that's true, but the missed sessions are harder for me to explain. My partner and I always go in expecting Marie to show up. We always think the session will happen. When she interrupts, leaves because another charge needs her, or refuses to finish because I'm overwhelming her, that catches us off guard. Those moments don't match what we think will happen. They break the pattern. And honestly, that's the part that sticks with me most. It's not what Marie says, it's when she just isn't there at all.